It is my duty to inform the House that the Speaker is unavoidably absent. Therefore, in accordance with the statutes, I would ask the Deputy Speaker to please take the chair.
Good afternoon, everybody. Please be seated. Routine proceedings, introduction of bills. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Sport, Culture and Heritage, that Bill number 7, the Liquor, Gaming and Cannabis Control Amendment Act, be now read for a first time.
It has been moved by the Honourable Minister of Justice, seconded by the Honourable Minister for Sport, Culture and Heritage, that Bill number 7, the Liquor, Gaming and Cannabis Control Amendment Act, be now read a first time. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Liquor service licenses are for locations such as restaurants and bars where liquor is consumed on site. Currently, the framework for these licenses is very complicated. Many licenses have requirements related to offering entertainment, hospitality experiences, or food service, none of which relate to the safe and responsible service of liquor. Under the proposed legislative amendments, the number of categories would be reduced to provide a more flexible framework that would allow for new businesses and different models of serving liquor to be established.
Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? Agreed and so ordered. The Honourable Member for St. Boniface.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I move, seconded by the member for Tyndall Park, that Bill number 215, the Non-Disclosure Agreements Act, Loi sur les accords de confidentialité, be now read a first time.
It has been moved by the Honourable Member for St. Boniface, seconded by the Honourable Member for Tyndall Park, that Bill number 215, the Non-Disclosure Agreements Act, be now read a first time. The Honourable Member for St. Boniface.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This is an updated version of a previous bill, which includes amendments suggested by witnesses of committee. Non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, in Manitoba and indeed around the world have been used to silence survivors of sexual harassment, intimidation, and misconduct in many instances. A similar bill recently passed in the United States, where it was described as one of the greatest step forwards for labour legislation in many years. Manitoba Liberals heard from many folks in the community who've been harmed because of being coerced or pressured into signing an NDA. And we heard riveting testimony at committee, as did all the members from all parties, from victims of all walks of life, on the reasons NDAs need to be reformed so that predators and harassers will no longer be shielded and victims can speak freely while maintaining the NDA's existence to protect intellectual property. We look forward to the support of all members towards Bill 215. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Committee reports. Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? Agreed and so ordered. Committee reports. Tabling of reports. Order, please, in accordance with sections 29 subsection 3 and 30 subsection 6 of the Advocate for Children and Youth Act. I am tabling the annual report and service plan of the Manitoba Advocate for Children and Youth for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022. At this time, I also wish to draw the attention of all honourable members to the Speaker's Gallery, where we have with us today the Right Honourable David Johnston, former Governor-General of Canada. On behalf of all honourable members, we welcome you here today. I'd also like to draw the attention of all honourable members to the public gallery, where we have with us today members of the Manitoba Chambers of Commerce, who are the guests of the Honourable Minister of Economic Development, Investment and Trade. On behalf of all honourable members, we welcome you here today also. Ministerial statements. The Honourable First Minister. Just a moment here. The required 90 minutes notice prior to routine proceedings was provided in accordance with the rules. Would the Honourable First Minister please proceed with the statement?
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I rise today to provide the House with an update on Manitoba's support for Ukrainian refugees fleeing a brutal war of aggression against Ukraine and its courageous people. Canadians remain united in outrage and common purpose against the appalling war against Ukraine and the senseless tragedy and unimaginable loss it continues to cause. Nowhere in Canada is this more pronounced than here in Manitoba. For over 130 years, Ukrainians have come to Manitoba to make this beautiful province their home. Their many contributions are woven into the very fabric of our communities, embedded within our culture, and are a significant part of our heritage and traditions. While 1 in 7 Manitobans are of Ukrainian descent, we are all Ukrainians during this terrible ordeal, and we continue to welcome Ukrainians with open hearts and open arms. Manitoba's support for Ukrainians seeking refuge has been unwavering. We continue to lead the country in providing a full range of provincial services and settlement supports. Our Ukrainian Refugee Task Force model is the national benchmark, and on a per capita basis, more Ukrainians have come to Manitoba than any other province. The services and supports we are providing are fundamental, comprehensive, and far-reaching. The overall impact and results of our government's policies have been remarkable. To date, over 13,000 Ukrainians have presented at our reception and welcoming center. We have provided over 100,000 nights of safe shelter and accommodation in provincially supplied hotel rooms and spaces. We have issued more than 9,000 Manitoba health cards, and we have processed over 7,000 reimbursement claims for the costs of the federal government's mandatory immigration medical examinations. Because of our government's determination to support Ukrainians in need, Manitoba continues to lead the country on a proportionate basis. About 12% of all Ukrainians coming to Canada are coming to Manitoba. That is more than 3 times our percentage of the national population. None of this would have been possible without our deep partnership with the Ukrainian Canadian Congress and the entire Ukrainian Canadian community, along with the incredible outpouring of support of all Manitobans. These foundational working relationships have been essential, and the response of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress and the broader Ukrainian Canadian community have been truly inspiring. These leadership partnerships with government have been part of an amazing province-wide support effort. From our NGOs and settlement agencies, our municipalities, our fully engaged business community, other community organizations, and all other key partners and volunteers. All Manitobans should be proud of our collective efforts. Our unwavering support for Ukraine and its courageous people reflects the very finest Manitoba traditions, standing against brutality and oppression, caring, compassion, and dedication, and mobilizing to help refugees in need. Mr. Deputy Speaker, joining us in the gallery today is our dear friends Ostapkrips Nick from Ukrainian Canadian Congress, Manitoba Provincial Council, and with them our recent refugees to Manitoba. We are now proudly assisting the arrivals of other Ukrainians seeking shelter in Manitoba through coordination work on our government's Ukrainian Refugee Task Force. This list of special Ukrainian guests includes Irina Klimenko, Roman Mechak, Daria Gorska, Anna Slavina. Vitaimo. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I thank all of these individuals for their bravery, their continued dedication and hard work on behalf of all Manitobans. And I ask the House, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to extend a kind welcome to our guests who are here in the gallery with us today. Slava Ukraini.
Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I want to begin by acknowledging our esteemed guest in the Speaker's gallery today, the former Governor General of Canada, Mr. David Johnston. Certainly, your service on behalf of all Canadians, Canadians with disabilities, and those in uniform has been a guiding light to those of us who follow you in a life of public service. And of course, your work as the GG, if we can say that, was certainly something that we all look back fondly on. So thank you for joining us today, and welcome to the Chamber. I want to also welcome our guests who are joining us here from the UCC Manitoba chapter, as well as those who have arrived in Manitoba recently. By now you may have heard the term miigwech, meaning thank you in the original language of this territory. And today I would add to that, miigwech kijayik, thank you for coming here. And so we say those words of welcome to you. We know that it has been a difficult year in Ukraine and a difficult year for Ukrainians around the world ever since Vladimir Putin launched his illegal and unjust war. We've all been moved by the images of Ukrainians standing up to defend their homeland, as we have all been moved by the call to protect Ukrainian language and culture, both overseas but also right here in Manitoba. And so while in this chamber we may find many causes for quarrel and disagreement, I believe this is one issue on which we all stand united, which is Manitoba's undying and complete solidarity with the people of Ukraine. You heard my colleague, the First Minister, point out that 1 in 7 Manitobans is of Ukrainian heritage, and certainly that is an important part of why this issue is so front and center for many people in Manitoba. But I also say it's important for people of all backgrounds in this great province, because whether or not you are Ukrainian, all of us here in Manitoba grew up eating Ukrainian food. And so that, among many reasons, compels us to stand up and call for more supports and call for further action to support those who are joining us here in Manitoba, and of course to offer solidarity as we have service people overseas in the theater in Eastern Europe who are supporting the efforts of those Ukrainians who are bravely fighting on the front lines. Now, we know that many folks have arrived here in Manitoba, and it will be important as a province that we continue to support them. We need language supports, educational supports, employment supports. We're going to have to continue to be there on the issue of housing. I want to say that it is a remarkable testament to the people of Manitoba that at the community level, they have stood up in communities like Dauphin and Steinbach, here in Winnipeg, in northern Manitoba, in all reaches of the province, to do good work to welcome our Ukrainian relatives here in Manitoba. As we approach this first holiday season in which Putin's war continues, I think the relevance of this issue takes on perhaps added meaning. And of course, when I say holiday season, I do include the January 6th Orthodox Christmas as part of that conversation. And so as we reflect on what that means at this time, certainly we've all learned the name Zelensky. We have all witnessed acts of heroism and bravery, and we are reminded, I would suggest, not just of the importance of standing up for liberty, rights, and freedom in the Ukraine, but perhaps also of the importance of standing up for liberty, rights, and freedom here at home as well. Miigwech. Merci. Thank you very much.
The Honourable Member for St. Boniface.
I seek leave to speak to the Minister's statement.
Is there leave for the member to speak to the Minister's statement? Agreed. Leave has been granted. The Honourable Member for St. Boniface.
I thank the First Minister for the opportunity to speak on Ukraine. First, as Manitobans, all of our lives have been influenced and enriched by Ukrainian culture in our province. It's been woven into part of who we are. Canada was the first country to recognize Ukraine's independence from the Soviet Union, and in the 1920s, when Ukraine was independent from the Soviet Union, The North American headquarters was here in Winnipeg. I have said to Ukrainians many times since Putin's unprovoked, unwarranted, and illegal invasion of Ukraine in February that their fight is our fight, and this is the fight of our time. We should be very clear that Russia and other autocratic, anti-democratic forces are seeking to reshape the world order, and they are doing so not only in Ukraine, but across Europe, North America, and around the world. Putin and others are seeking to establish control over Ukraine's flow of oil and wheat in ways that will establish dominance over Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. He's launched a war on multiple fronts, and it has touched us all. Soaring global oil prices have had a crushing effect on economies as much of Europe struggles to keep warm with diminished energy supplies. Others in the UK are facing harsh increases in the cost of food and fuel. This economic impact is deliberate. It is part of economic warfare, and it results in real pain and increases domestic political divisions, including here in Canada. We should be very conscious of the Putin premium we're all having to pay at the pump. I believe that Putin's goal, which will fail, is to trigger the collapse of the US, as the USSR collapsed 30 years ago. He's willing to starve, freeze, and kill people to get his way. I have never in my life heard anyone threaten to use nuclear weapons in the way he has. We cannot let him win. But this is one of Putin's many colossal and horrific misjudgments. He misjudged the strength and resilience of President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people. He misjudged the strength and resilience of Canada, NATO, and our allies, and the leadership of the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress and broader community in Canada. We do need to provide real relief and help to those who are suffering. Manitoba and Canada can step up as best we can, whether it is with food, shelter, energy, sanctuary, or technology. We may need to broaden our support and work with our European allies. Finally, we need to push back on another front, which is the propaganda front. Russia has a long tradition of patient and effective interference with propaganda and with other countries, and the internet has handed them the greatest propaganda machine of all time, with the ability to divide, radicalize, misinform, disinform, and muddy the water so badly that no one knows who to believe. Canada and Canadians are a target in this, and so-called influencers, even Elon Musk, Jordan Peterson, Tucker Carlson, and many others have voiced pro-Putin sentiments, essentially repeating Kremlin talking points. What we are fighting for today is what we fought for in the past. It's against totalitarianism of the right and the left. It is not a choice between fascism and communism. It is a choice, and always was, between freedom and liberal democracy on the one hand and authoritarian systems of the far right and far left. In a democracy, dissent and an independent judiciary are essential, something that the extremes of right and left could never tolerate. That is because the truth can stand to be challenged, while a lie cannot. The fight for Ukraine, democratic, independent, sovereign, is the fight of our time. Slava Ukraini.
There's one more group I'd like to draw the attention of all members to. We have 20 grade 9 students from River East Collegiate under the direction of, I hope I say this right, Ben Zajac. Did I get that right? Oh, thank you. Great, okay. Welcome. Located in the constituency, my constituency, member for Rossiter. Nice to see you guys. Welcome here. The Honourable Minister of Mental Health and Community Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Today I rise to acknowledge the global movement of Movember that occurs annually throughout the month of November. By growing out hair, or mow, participants can help raise funds for programming, research, and awareness of men's health issues, mental health, and suicide prevention. There is also a challenge specific to suicide prevention to run or to walk 60 kilometers over the month for the 60 men we lose to suicide each hour, every hour, across the world. This is truly outstanding work, and I would like to commend the participants, organizations, and businesses working to expand awareness about Movember and men's mental health. In particular, I would like to acknowledge the Manitoba Mustache Farmers, a group of men from my Department of Mental Health and Community Wellness. Various members of this group have been involved with this cause since 2012 to promote men's health issues, including suicide prevention. They have gone above and beyond with their fundraising efforts to support Movember this year, including organizing a chili cook-off and a bake sale, with 100% of the proceeds going to Movember. I am pleased to have the Manitoba Mustache Farmers in the gallery today to be recognized and to show off their mow. I encourage Manitobans to participate in Movember activities or support the cause with a donation. You can now download a Movember app to learn more. As part of our 5-year roadmap for mental health, we are all committed to building a coordinated provincial response for the prevention of suicide in partnership with a special focus on at-risk communities and populations. In honor of Movember, I encourage all Manitobans to raise awareness regarding men's mental health. Together, we can reduce stigma and ensure that men receive the support that they may need. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, I will submit all the names of the guests we have here in the gallery today, and I encourage all members to acknowledge them and celebrate with them all of their success. Thank you.
I would just say to the Honourable Minister that in order to have those names in Hansard, she needs to ask the House for leave. The Honourable Minister of Mental Health and Community Wellness.
Mr. Deputy Minister, I ask leave of the House to submit all the names of my guests in the gallery today.
Is there leave to have those names included in Hansard? Agreed and so ordered. I also need to indicate to the House that the required 90 minutes notice prior to routine proceedings was provided in accordance with the rules for the Minister's statement. The Honourable Member for Transcona.
Well, thank you, Deputy Speaker. For 16 years running, every November, men all over the world have participated in Movember. Movember is an annual event which aims to raise funds and awareness for issues particular to men's health, such as prostate cancer, testicular cancer, and men's suicide. Participants can grow a mo, which involves men growing mustaches, no matter how lopsided, patchy, or thin, for the entire month of November to raise awareness and funds. Community members can also choose to make a move by running or walking 60 kilometers over a period of 1 month for the number of men we lose to suicide per hour across the world. Movember aims to break the stigma of men suffering in silence rather than seeking help. From a young age, boys and men are taught to not show emotion and to be a man. This has led to men not seeking help when they need it and being shamed as weak when they do seek help. It's incredibly important that we continue to challenge this particular stigma so that men and boys can live healthy, long lives. Movember also encourages men to get checked for prostate and testicular cancer, as many men don't know about the risks. Prostate cancer is the most common form of cancer among Canadian men and is known as the silent killer, as it can grow unnoticed for years. Funds raised during Movember are used to sponsor mental health projects, therapies, and diagnostic tests for men around the world. To date, 1,250 men's health projects have been sponsored. Many Manitobans are participating in Movember, including the Paramedic Association of Manitoba. They have a target to raise $3,000 towards addressing men's mental health issues. I commend this association and the countless other people who are taking part in Movember this year. Each and every one of us has a role to play in addressing men's health issues in our communities, whether it be by starting conversations to raise awareness or raising funds. Together, we can make life better for our dads, brothers, and sons. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
The Honourable Member for River Heights.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I ask leave to respond to the Minister's statement.
Does the member have leave? Leave has been granted. The Honourable Member for River Heights.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Although I, like others, welcome the presence of former Governor General David Johnston with us earlier today. I remember fondly when I was a member of Parliament and was able to work closely with David Johnston on the internet development across Canada, as we called it then, the Information Highway. And I admired David Johnston's ability to chair a very diverse committee of Canadians from across the country, some from business, some from community, some from universities, promoting and developing a plan to access and use the internet in Canada. There's much that's positive that has come from that, and some that are not so positive, but it has changed a lot of the world that we have today. November is an important month for men's health. Movember focuses on prostate cancer, testicular cancer, and mental health, including prevention of suicides. It is important to me personally, in part because I've had relatives with both testicular and prostate cancer and with depression. So I think that when we look out around those around us, that many of us are aware of people who have one or more of these conditions. Activities associated with November include growing a beard or walking or running for 60 kilometers. I'm personally into running and walking and cross-country skiing, and I believe I should be able to make the 60 kilometers this November, providing I can include the cross-country skiing, which I enjoy. Raising funds for research is important because it is through research that we can find a way forward based on science. And some of the research as it relates to prostate cancer has been clear, and other has been frustratingly varied and not as clear as we might like. Exercise is clearly protective against prostate cancer and indeed against many other cancers. The protection of foods in the
Members'
diet
time has expired. Is there leave for him to finish his statement? Agreed. The honourable member for River Heights.
In regards to prostate cancer, foods like tomatoes, pomegranates, Brazil nuts containing things like lycopene, polyphenols, and selenium may have a role, but there really is still a lot more to learn, and it may be that some combination may be the most effective of all. With those comments, I thank the members for their allowing me to complete this. Merci, miigwech.
Members' statements. The honourable member for Fort White.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. One of my favorite parts of this job is standing in this House and recognizing some of the amazing work happening by some of the most amazing people in my riding of Fort White. This person works tirelessly at their self-made business, Cranked Energy Bars, makes time for her family, helps with her kids' sports, takes her dogs for walks, Maddie, and does not leave her in the car unattended. And yet on top of all that, somehow she has time to give back to the community. Today, I'm happy to rise and recognize one of my constituents in Fort White, who is a shining example of what it means to be a philanthropic community leader and business leader, Cheryl Zealand. Cheryl dedicates much of her time and energy to many different charities and organizations throughout Manitoba. There is no way I'm going to be able to list them all, but I will list off a few. From Mama Bear Clan, Red Road Lodge, Salvation Army, Shiloh Mission, Star Program, Special Olympics Manitoba, Main Street Project, Dream Factory, and many, many more. Cheryl has 3 young, beautiful sons, Cole, Luke, and Kyle, and they're growing fast. She realized quickly that she had a massive stockpile of hockey equipment and thought if she was having this issue, other people must as well. So she organized a hockey gear donation drive and donated them all to organizations in need. Cheryl is one of those people that cares deeply about the people around her and just wants to help wherever she can. Cheryl also organized a positive spin targeting ALS by her company, Cranked Energy, and raised to date a whopping $17,500 to help Corey McCracken's family. Sadly, Corey passed away in 2019 due to his battle with ALS. People like Cheryl make the world a better place, and I'm happy and blessed that Cheryl lives in my riding of Fort White. For all the work you do, Cheryl, thank you so much, and keep it up. I would like to ask now that all my colleagues rise and recognize Cheryl, who is with us here in our gallery, along with her husband, Tim McQueen, who is a fantastic hockey player.
The honourable member for Point Douglas.
Miigwech. November 25th to December 10th is the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. This campaign started in 1991 to call out and speak up on gender-based violence. It gives us all an opportunity every year to commit our time and energy to ending violence against women and to us LGBTQ individuals. We know that gender-based violence does not affect all women equally. It is much more commonly experienced by Indigenous women than non-Indigenous women. And the most obvious example is that of the tragic genocide of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirited people. We must take action to end this violence. Gender-based violence happens every day. It happens in streets, in homes, in workplaces, and online. It comes from strangers, family members, and colleagues. Unfortunately, no space is safe from gender-based violence, not even this chamber. As legislators, we are held to a higher standard and looked to as role models and must never diminish, condone, gaslight, or justify any acts of violence. I want to thank the hundreds of folks who have reached out and shared their experience of how their experience was diminished and what started as a hit to the wall or a piece of furniture quickly escalated to physical violence. What we do in this chamber matters, and if we stay silent or support any act of violence, we are essentially giving our permission for this violence to be normalized. As a survivor, I dedicated my life to standing up against violence against women. I will continue to do that, and I will never ever let anyone silence me from doing so. If you or someone you know are living with or a survivor of violence and need support, please feel free to reach out to me and know that you are loved, valued, and sacred, and that I am here if you need support. Miigwech.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's my pleasure to rise today to deliver a private member statement to congratulate all of the organizations in the Lactabani constituency that have hosted holiday events and those who are yet to have theirs. I would like to applaud and give thanks to volunteers and community members who play an essential role in making these events happen. Now that we have transitioned into our winter months and the holiday season, we can find that there are so many great events to look forward to. Coming up in the Lactabani constituency, we have the Kids Snowflake Bazaar on December 2nd and 3rd in Great Falls, Manitoba, the Canadian Pacific Holiday Train on December 3rd in Whitemouth, the Canadian Power Toboggan Championships on December 10th and 11th and early March 2023 in Beausejour, and of course the Lactabani Ice Fishing Derby on February 25th, 2023. We are fortunate during all seasons in the Lactabani constituency as we have 9 golf courses, some rated the best in Canada. Amazing trails like the Pinawa Trail, Red River North Trail, the Blue Water South Trail, and the Mantario Trail. Whether you enjoy hiking, cross-country skiing, fishing, or snowshoeing, there is a number of various things to do throughout the constituency. There are also groomed snowmobile trails all across the great constituency, which also includes our provincial parks, which are maintained by local snowmobile clubs and volunteers. Let's continue to support our communities, Mr. Deputy Speaker, by attending these events and continue to take the time to thank our volunteers for their input on making these events so successful. Again, I encourage all to come out to the Lactabani constituency for a visit or a stay this winter holiday season, as we have something for everyone. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Fort Garry.
The Premier says enough is enough on her government's approach to community safety. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, let's look at her record. When she was the Justice Minister, she cut the Gang Action Task Force, the Spotlight Unit, restorative justice programming, employment training for those incarcerated, the John Howard and Elizabeth Fry Societies. This government claims that they're tough on crime, but their approach has failed. By October 31st of this year, Manitoba tied the previous year's homicide record, making Manitoba among the highest rates of homicide in any Canadian province. Increasing crime under this government should be understood in its context. This government has spent years of austerity cutting measures that support Manitobans in vulnerable positions. The root causes of crime are complex, but the PC government's cut to services, supports, and push to criminalize rather than humanize those addicted to substances has only made the situation worse. Combating crime requires a real focus on root causes, such as healthcare inequality, high child poverty rates, a lack of affordable housing, a lack of mental health and substance abuse supports, as well as unresolved impacts of colonization and intergenerational trauma on Indigenous people. We will continue to advocate for investments in services. Manitobans know that austerity and cuts won't address the root causes of crime. Investments such as healthcare, education, mental health and addiction services, and recreational opportunities mean that communities will be safer for families in the long term. Thank you.
The honourable member for St. Boniface.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Il y a 100 ans, le 25 novembre, qu'un incendie détruit le collège de Saint-Boniface et sa bibliothèque. La perte de la bibliothèque a fait que de nombreux documents des premiers franco-manitobains arrivés dans la région ont été perdus. De plus, une vaste collection de manuscrits théologiques datant du 16e siècle et presque tous les reliques du fort Saint-Charles qui avaient été recueillis par les fondateurs de la Société historique de Saint-Boniface ont également été dévorés par les flammes. À mesure que j'ai appris l'histoire, j'ai acquis une compréhension beaucoup plus profonde de l'oppression choquante à laquelle les francophones du Manitoba et de l'Ouest étaient confrontés. En plus de l'épithète et de la suppression des droits, il y a des actes de violence pure et simple. Partout au Canada, dans les années 1920, il y a eu des incendies, des menaces de mort et des brûlures croisées. Il y a eu des attaques contre les églises catholiques à Québec et un bâton de dynamite a fait un trou dans une église à Barrie, en Ontario. Avant que le collège Saint-Boniface brûlé, tuant 10 étudiants, le collège avait reçu des lettres de menaces de la part du Ku Klux Klan qui, il y a 100 ans, était une force grandissante partout au Canada, surtout en Saskatchewan, où il comptait 25 000 membres. Quand, en 1928, Daniel Grant, un organisateur du Klan, est venu à Winnipeg poussant la haine, il a ciblé les Manitobains juifs, les Manitobains noirs, japonais, chinois et surtout les catholiques français. Le prêtre en charge de la cathédrale de Saint-Boniface, Monseigneur Wilfrid Jubenville, a accusé Grant d'être un lâche et a l'averti de rester en dehors de Saint-Boniface. Le prêtre a déclaré que l'Église catholique romaine combattrait la Klan dans toute sa puissance. Le chef de police de Saint-Boniface, Thomas Gagnon, a déclaré ceci: « Il n'y a rien à Saint-Boniface pour attirer le Klan. » Et depuis, il a nié que la ville était prise dans un étau. Le chef de police Gagnon a ajouté que si le Klan faisait une descente à Saint-Boniface, des mesures policières draconiennes seraient prises. La
The
haine a
member's time
continué.
has expired. Is there leave for the member to complete his statement? Agreed. The honourable member for St. Boniface.
Thank you. La haine a continué pour des décennies. Dans les années 1980, lors d'un violent débat linguistique au Manitoba, les bureaux de la Société franco-manitobaine ont été incendiés. Il a fallu des décennies pour que les droits durement acquis soient restitués. Ils sont encore menacés aujourd'hui. Je salue le courage et la ténacité de la communauté française du Manitoba, qui est depuis le début un rempart contre l'extrémisme. Merci.
Oral questions. The honourable leader of the official opposition.
It's time to respect working people in Manitoba again. You won't get that with the PCs, but you will get that with the Manitoba NDP. It's one of the reasons that we're worried about the way that this government has structured the North End water treatment plant deal. See, the way they structured the deal in question here, too many of these jobs are going to be sent out of province. We have a firm belief on this side of the House. Manitoba jobs should go to Manitobans. Absolutely. Why doesn't the Premier agree that Manitoba jobs should go to Manitobans?
The Honourable First Minister.
Deputy Speaker, this coming from a leader of the opposition that's part of a party that drove Manitobans out of this province when it came, and they were the workforce of every other province, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So we will take no lessons from members opposite when it comes to growing jobs in our province. In fact, 55,000 more jobs were created in Manitoba just in the last little while since the pandemic. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we're moving in the right direction. We are ensuring that we're growing our economy here in Manitoba. We know if we're growing our economy, that will be more revenues to the provincial government where we can afford things like healthcare, education, social services that Manitobans need, want, and deserve.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on a follow-up question.
Statistics Canada is clear. More Manitobans left this province than they have in a generation. And the Premier calls that moving in the right direction. That's wrong. We should be bringing Manitobans' youth back to our province, not chasing them away, but it's in keeping with the government that sends million-dollar checks to billion-dollar companies on Bay Street, that sends checks to billionaires headquartered in Kansas, that continues to try and send revenue from our parks out to a company in Texas. We have a very simple belief on this side of the House. Manitoba's economy should be driven by Manitoba jobs, and Manitoba jobs should go to Manitobans. Why does the Premier disagree?
The Honourable First Minister.
Well, one of the things that Manitobans wanted us to highlight is some of the exciting things that we're doing to grow our economy here in Manitoba. In fact, just in the throne speech, Mr. Deputy Speaker, some of the announcements that we made, a $50 million venture capital fund has already attracted more than $150 million more in investments for this wonderful province of ours. $74 million from the provincial government, and then double that with the federal government's involvement, again working collaboratively with the federal government on the Churchill rail line. A $40 million commitment to Centerport that will bring more than $1 billion to our province, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We heard loud and clear from Manitobans. That's why we put that in our throne speech. That's why we're working with Manitobans to grow our economy. And what did members opposite do? They voted against it. Shame on them.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on a final supplementary.
You know, it's really something that at the end of 2 terms, all they have to show for their time in office is press releases and announcements and things that they plan to do in the future. Well, I have news for the Premier and for the PCs. If you can't get it done in 2 terms, you don't deserve a third. We're talking about a water treatment plant that is one of the biggest infrastructure projects in the province, and yet they want to send those Manitoba tax dollars out of Manitoba. And let's not even talk about the Channels project in the Interlake that is needed to help that region brace for potential future flooding. 2 terms in office, not a single shovel in the ground. Why doesn't the Premier prioritize working people in Manitoba, and why doesn't she guarantee that Manitoba jobs will go to Manitobans?
The Honourable First Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank all of those from the Manitoba Chamber of Commerce who are here with us in the gallery today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and thank them for all of the work that they do to grow our economy here in Manitoba. Thank you for everything that you do. As a matter of fact, I and the Minister for Economic Development, Investment and Trade had the opportunity to meet with the Manitoba Chambers of Commerce just the other day, Mr. Deputy Speaker, listening to them and what they're hearing out there in Manitoba. They want to ensure that we're growing our economy here in our province, Mr. Speaker, and ensuring that we have those jobs that are there for Manitobans when they need them, Mr. Deputy Speaker. One of the things we heard loud and clear is that there is a challenge, not just here in Manitoba, but across the country when it comes to labor shortages, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So again, we are working together with the Manitoba Chambers of Commerce. We're working together with Manitobans to help grow our economy, unlike members opposite, Mr. Deputy Speaker, who just drove people out of our province. We don't want to go back to those dark days.
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on a new question.
Again, just to repeat the fact that more Manitoba youth left the province in the past year than they have in a generation. That happened under their watch, and it happened as a result of their failed economic plan. Now, we know when it comes to healthcare, it's a similar story. They love to make announcements and put out press releases, but it's never followed up with any action. That's why so many communities across Manitoba are seeing closures and cuts when it comes to healthcare. A year ago, the PCs promised that they would create a float pool for nurses. The goal was to reduce the reliance on private, for-profit nursing agencies. But in the past year, not one nurse was hired for that proposed float pool. Why has the Premier refused to hire even one nurse to the provincial float pool?
The Honourable First Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, there is nothing even remotely factual in what the Leader of the Opposition just said. But I want to thank and commend our Minister of Health, who was out at the Grace Hospital this morning, meeting with frontline employees at the Grace Hospital this morning. Unlike the Leader of the Opposition and members opposite who just like to pull stunts on the front lawn of the Grace Hospital, Mr. Deputy Speaker, our Minister of Health is working diligently and meeting with frontline healthcare workers. I want to thank her. We're listening to those healthcare workers and we're taking action on their behalf. I want to thank her for the incredible work that she's doing.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on a follow-up question.
Yikes.
So again, out-migration is worse than it's been in a generation. That's sourced from Statistics Canada. We've seen closures across the province, even just this week. Ask the good folks of Ericsdale. And when we talk about the fact that not one single nurse has been hired to the provincial float pool that this PC cabinet announced, the source there is the Manitoba Nurses Union. I think Manitobans are inclined to believe nurses rather than the PCs. The question remains, though, why did the PCs make yet another health care promise and then break it?
The Honourable First Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the litany of false accusations by the Leader of the Opposition. But he did mention one thing, the worst in Canada, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Let's go back to 2014. Winnipeg's Grace Hospital was had the worst ER wait times in Canada, according to a study. According to a report released by Kai at the time, 4 of the 5 slowest ERs in Canada were in Winnipeg at the time, Mr. Speaker. Who was in power at that time? It was under Greg Selinger and NDP government. I can tell you Manitobans don't want to go back to those dark days again.
Order. Order. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on a final supplementary.
So I just want to return to something, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Again, the Premier alleged that there was something amiss in my question, so I provided every single fact along with the accompanying source. So I would invite the Premier, in her answer to this question, say specifically on the record what she was referring to. I know the good people watching at home want to see a debate on the facts. They want to see healthcare being engaged with in an important, substantive way. The fact is, we know that this government has not hired one single nurse for the provincial float pool that they announced. Once again, an announcement, broken promise, no action. Why did the Premier break the promise that she made within the past year by not hiring a single nurse to the provincial float pool?
The Honourable First Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition has one thing right, that Manitobans want us to be debating on the facts. There was nothing even remotely to a fact that was anywhere in the preamble of the Leader of the Opposition. That is the fact, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But I think it's important that we give Manitobans an update on how our diagnostic and surgical backlog is going, and I want to thank those and commend those on the committee for all of the hard work that they do. for cataract surgery has now been fully eliminated. The backlog has now been fully eliminated. More than 11,000 completed procedures in this year alone. We've reduced the pandemic backlog in half for ultrasounds from almost 4,500 procedures to under 2,000. The backlog for orthopedic knee replacements has been reduced by 27% since February. We're making good progress, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We recognize there's more work to do, but I'll remind all Manitobans out there who are watching this great question period today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what did members opposite do? They voted against every
First
single
Minister's
one
time
of these.
has expired. The honourable member for Union Station.
Deputy Speaker, Lyons Place is being sold. Yesterday, it was revealed that the minister hasn't even talked to the executive director of Lyons Place, and I'll table those documents. Lyons Place told the media that they have never been contacted by any level of government to discuss any possible solutions. The executive director said, and I quote, "For the minister to make a statement that they are working on a solution and yet not talking to anyone at Lyons about the solution is not acceptable," end quote. We agree. The minister has had months of warning, Deputy Speaker. Why hasn't she lifted a finger to help the seniors at Lyons Place?
The Honourable Minister of Families.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And contrary to the member's false allegations, our government has been working diligently to ensure that all the seniors at Lyons Place are taken care of. And we do want to extend our commitment to them that we are working diligently on their behalf. One thing that we will not do, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is like members opposite when they had a situation at a Manitoba housing building where they forced residents out of their building with little notice. 135 people were evacuated from a facility, some of whom had mobility issues. And you know what else is really heinous? They didn't allow them to take their pets. And one resident is quoted as saying, "Some people left behind their birds, their cats. I had fish I had to leave behind. I have no idea if they're still alive because we are not allowed in the building."
Expired. The honourable member for Union Station.
Deputy Speaker, you'll note that the minister did not actually answer my question or address the fact that she hasn't actually met with these folks. The executive director of Lyons Place says, and I quote, that this government is not talking to anyone at Lyons, end quote. This government has had months to take action. Even now, they are suggesting they're doing something, and it turns out they haven't done anything, Deputy Speaker. They haven't talked to anyone, and that's coming directly from Lyons Place. This government could take action to stop the sale at Lyons. Why are they misleading Manitobans about this sale, and why won't they take the action they should to protect seniors at Lyons Place?
The Honourable Minister of Families.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And as I've stated in this House, and as I've stated publicly very clearly, our government has taken action. We are part of a working group. We've met with other levels of government, and we are working on behalf of those seniors to ensure that they have affordable housing. Today, this month and well into the future, we are going to ensure that they have the housing that they need. Unlike members opposite who forced 135 people, many of whom had mobility challenges. And I'd like to table for the members opposite an article about their government's actions in 2015 when they vacated these people, forced them out of their building. They told them that they could not take their cats, their dogs, their fish, their birds. The tenants were worried about their birds and their fish dying, and those animals were left to perish.
The Honourable Minister's time has expired. Order, please. Order, please. Order. The honourable member for Union Station on a final supplementary.
Deputy Speaker, this minister displaced residents who are now living in Lyons Place and are scared of again being displaced. The actions of this government This minister has known for months about the challenges at Lyons Place. Residents were informed by management in July that their building would be put up for sale, and the minister could have taken action then. Instead, she chooses to say she's doing something when, in fact, she's not doing anything. They could pass legislation right now requiring provincial approval when housing goes up for sale. This has been done in other provinces, Deputy Speaker. Will the minister take any steps at all to immediately protect the seniors at Lyons Place?
Right on. Yeah. The Honourable Minister of Families.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And of course, our government has done many things, and we will continue to work on behalf of the seniors who are living in affordable housing in the province of Manitoba, looking at other jurisdictions, ensuring that the best practices are here in Manitoba. What we won't do is what the members opposite did in that member's own constituency at 185 Smith. They forced the people out. They didn't let them take their animals. They left the animals behind to perish. Here's what one of the tenants says. I am worried about other people who left their animals. I have no idea if they're still alive, and we're not even allowed to go back in the building to check on the animals. That is their government's history. That is how their government treated residents of Manitoba housing. Our government is certainly not going to listen to what those members did. We are going to ensure that all members have a safe and affordable place to call home.
The Honourable Minister's time has expired. The Honourable Member for Wolseley.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Our parks are a public good. They should be accessible and available to Manitobans of all incomes. Unfortunately, the PCs are making that harder. New information obtained through FIPA shows that the province accepted a user pay model for the provision of services and deliverables, which they awarded to RA Outdoors. I'll table that document. This is why the costs of day passes have doubled. It's also what this government has in store for everything else. Every user pays more. Why is the minister charging more for the use of our parks?
The Honourable Minister for Environment, Climate and Parks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and certainly thank the member for the thank you. Thank the member for that question. And we've had this discussion and many times in this chamber, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We know that this government is making investments in our parks, unlike members opposite for 17 years that, again, Mr. Deputy Speaker, didn't do anything with our wonderful parks in this great province of ours, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We know that we will ensure that generations to come will enjoy our publicly owned provincial parks for generations to come.
The Honourable Member for Wolseley on a follow-up question.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, this user pay model makes our parks less accessible for thousands of families in Manitoba. The cost of day passes doubled, and this government is sending millions of dollars to Texas. It's also a concern for the future. A plan for privatization and contracting out has sat on the minister's desk since the spring. The Parks Review has still not been released. Their plan is more cost for Manitobans through a user pay model. Why won't they show that to Manitobans and release the Parks Review today?
The Honourable Minister for Environment, Climate and Parks.
Well, thank you again, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And we know that, again, our government is making investments in our parks, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We know a simple thing like Parks Reservation Service, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We know under the NDP that Manitobans sat on the phone for hours, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Hours and hours. They 6, 7 hours. Then they would go online, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And they would watch the dial go round and around and around, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It kept going, and then they would drop off, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We are going to fix the Parks Reservation Service. We'll have a new one in place by April next year, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Manitobans are not only going to enjoy our parks, they're going to enjoy getting online and booking their parks.
Order. 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 I'm not sure where that came from, but maybe the House leaders want to chat with their members about calling their own members to order. The Honourable Member for Wolseley.
Deputy Speaker, it's amusing to hear yet another promise about something that's been announced that might happen in the future at the very end of this term of this government, but probably won't. So I reiterate, millions of dollars from Manitobans has been sent to a Texas company for park passes. The cost of day passes doubled. Our parks are a public good. They should be accessible and available to Manitobans of all incomes. This government, though, wants park users to pay more. Their user pay model means exactly that, and it's the approach coming in the Parks Review, and that's why it's been hidden for 6 months. Why won't the minister abandon this user pay approach and release the Parks Review today?
The Honourable Minister for Environment, Climate and Parks.
Well, again, thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And again, the member talks about accessibility in our parks. Well, it's never been better under this government, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We know that we've enhanced the services that we provide Manitobans. As a matter of fact, we know that, and I invite the member to come up fishing one day maybe and come up to Gimli or Winnipeg Beach or Grand Beach and come and check out some of the great services that our parks are now offering under this government, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We're not going back to the dark days of park no service under the NDP.
The Honourable Member for Fort Garry.
Working Manitobans continue to struggle with increasing high cost of living without support from this PC government. In fact, the PCs have made life more expensive for Manitoba by raising hydro rates, increasing taxes on renters, and increasing the price of milk. At the same time, the PCs have made life easier for some of the richest people in the world by giving them millions of dollars. Why has this government given billionaires checks when everyday Manitobans are struggling?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, the member for Fort Garry picked an awkward day to make a statement about hydro rates when he knew that last week's historic action by this government to lower the rates that Hydro pays to government have actually resulted in Hydro issuing a press release only an hour ago indicating that it is going to seek a rate increase far lower than the previous one that it had indicated to Manitobans, saving all Manitoba ratepayers hundreds and hundreds of dollars and stabilizing Hydro. Did the member want to instead ask a different question?
The Honourable Member for Fort Garry on a follow-up question.
This minister had a choice. He could have chose Manitobans. Instead, he threw his lot in with out-of-province billionaires. Charles Koch, Emmanuel Saputo, some of the richest people in the world. Together, their combined net worth is $75.2 billion. And thanks to PC handouts, they're now hundreds of thousands of dollars richer. Meanwhile, working Manitobans are struggling to get by during this affordability crisis. The PCs are quick to help their billionaire friends, but not everyday Manitobans. I'll ask the minister again, maybe he'll want to answer this time. Why are you abandoning everyday Manitobans?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Manitobans are tired of that member's politics of division. Here are the facts, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Our Premier announced a historic $87 million affordability package that gave $300 checks to seniors with less than $40,000 of income. That gave support to Manitoba food banks and gave support to parents with children in school. That member tries to play the politics of division. He knows that the groups he's really talking about are the everyday Manitobans who are facing the increasing costs, and those Manitobans our government is continuing to respond to.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Fort Garry on a final supplementary.
Manitobans know that this PC government is leaving them behind. They've raised hydro rates, they've increased the price of milk, and they've raised rent on renters. All during an affordability crisis. And instead, they've sent billionaires checks worth millions.
I can hear more from other members than the member who has the floor. The honourable member for Fort Garry, please continue your question. I'll give you 23 seconds to do so.
Thank you. This government has shown where they stand, and it's not with the Manitobans. But on this side of the House, we will always stand with the people of Manitoba. Can the minister explain why he gave checks to billionaires rather than support Manitobans?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the opposition party has continued to mislead Manitobans. They offered a fake rate freeze and said zeros, but they're refusing to tell Manitobans that the hangover comes with a double-digit increase in year 5. Our government took historic action, reduced the payments that Hydro makes to government, and today Hydro made a historic reapplication to the PUB and said, we don't need 3.5% anymore. We'll take 2% in perpetuity, meaning that all Manitobans will save hundreds of dollars. Hydro's debt will stabilize. We'll continue to help respond to the challenges faced by Manitobans. They'll continue, no doubt, to mislead Manitobans.
The honourable member for Flin Flon.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Manitobans know that there are multiple viruses going around. Some people have the luxury of staying home, working remotely, while they're getting paid. Many other hardworking Manitobans don't enjoy that same luxury, particularly low-wage workers. There is a solution, and the government can do it today, and that's paid sick leave. Will the minister implement a paid sick leave plan for Manitoba workers today?
The Honourable Minister of Labour, Consumer Protection and Government Services.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Well, we continue to review the options available to us, and we were one of the first governments in Canada to enable that sick leave through the pandemic, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Many small businesses took advantage of that and made sure that their staff were healthy and were able to stay away from work until they recovered. And we know that there's challenges out there, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and we're working through what we can do.
The honourable member for Flin Flon on a follow-up question.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. No one should have to make a choice between going to work or putting food on the table. That's what this minister is forcing Manitobans to do. People in other jurisdictions have implemented paid sick leave. BC, Quebec, the federal government, and there's no reason that we can't do the same thing in this province, other than the fact that the minister doesn't want to. Will the minister do the right thing for once? Implement paid sick leave today.
The Honourable Minister for Labour, Consumer Protection and Government Services.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Well, we regularly consult with Labour and management in Manitoba and follow their recommendations, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As I said earlier, we were among the first jurisdictions in Manitoba to have this program during the pandemic, with the Minister of Finance making that money available to business, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and the affordability package that has been put forth by our Premier, Mr. Deputy Speaker, makes life better in Manitoba for Manitobans.
The honourable member for Flin Flon on a final supplementary.
So back to paid sick leave. We don't have it in this province. We did for a little while, thanks to the federal government. We don't have it now. The minister can do the right thing and implement paid sick leave in the province of Manitoba today. It's unacceptable that workers, particularly low-wage workers, have to make a choice between going to work sick or putting food on the table. By going to work sick, They actually impact productivity, it goes down. They actually impact the shortage of workers that we see because more workers are going to get sick when people that are sick can't afford to stay home. Will this so-called Minister of Labour do the right thing, implement a paid sick leave program for Manitoba workers, and will he do it today?
Great job, Tom.
Members should be referred to by their title or constituency, and I just would caution so-called is not in keeping with the practice of this House. So a caution to that member. The Honourable Minister has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Well, members opposite just can't handle Manitobans being leaders, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We have the first female premier in Manitoba history with this government, Mr. Deputy Speaker. They can't handle that we have a Minister of Labour that regularly listens to and meets with and listens to both Labour and management in Manitoba, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We're listening, we're getting work done. Members opposite can talk all they want because Manitobans know where the work gets done, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
The Honourable Member for St. Boniface.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Doctors Manitoba recently released a shocking report about physician shortages in the province. We need 405 more doctors in Manitoba just to bring us up to the Canadian average. And Dr. Candice Bradshaw said 43% of physicians planning on retiring, leaving in Manitoba, or reducing their clinical hours in the short term. 3/4 of those with plans to leave or reduce their practice identified systemic or institutional factors behind their decision. They're leaving because under the PCs and NDP alike, our health system is dysfunctional. Is there any plan to address these issues now so we don't have doctors quitting the system en masse?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I thank the member for St. Boniface for the question. It gives me an opportunity to remind Manitobans that for 17 years, the NDP managed and ran the health system on a wing and a prayer, Mr. Deputy Speaker. There were times when their health minister was searching for a magic wand. In that time, Mr. Deputy Speaker, they did nothing to address the impending physician shortage. Mr. Deputy Speaker, but our government has a plan. We have taken concrete steps, $200 million to add 2,000 more health professionals to our health system. We are meeting with Doctors Manitoba. We are listening to frontline physicians, and we're currently reviewing the recommendations that came forward from the recent
The Honourable Minister's time has expired. The Honourable Member for St. Boniface.
That's a press release, not a plan. And this is a crisis on a crisis. Under the NDP and PCs alike, every day in this House, they compete to see who closed the most ERs and hospitals. 6 months ago, 3 programs of the U of M Faculty of Medicine nearly lost accreditation because of this government's catastrophic decision to close teaching clinics like the Family Clinic in St. Boniface and others. Our healthcare system depends on the U of M Medical School to run, but medical residents had nowhere to learn, so patients had no doctors to see. This is the kind of blunder that undermines the whole system. What is the plan? The plan to reverse it.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I believe the member for St. Boniface has access to the incentives that were announced by myself and the First Minister under the $200 million plan, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We are working with Doctors Manitoba. We are working with the front line, listening to their concerns and addressing those concerns through solid incentives. We're also addressing recommendations that were received from the recent rural physician recruitment summit that was hosted by Doctors Manitoba and the Manitoba Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for that great work that you did. We will respond in a meaningful way where Manitobans will be able to see the
Honourable
results.
Minister's time has expired. The Honourable Member for Tyndall Park.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Psychotherapy is a crucial service, and regulating it is so critical because we need to make sure that it's accessible and affordable, and that those who are practicing are properly trained to do so. Last week, the Health Professions Advisory Council shared a document from public consultation, and if I understand it correctly, I want to thank the government for getting this process going. Will the minister share with the House an update on plans to improve and regulate psychotherapy, and what sort of timeline should be anticipated?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the question. Our government is always focused on ensuring regulation is in place for the various health professions. We will continue to work with the colleges, with the associations. We will study reports that come forward on ways that we can modernize and change regulation to meet the needs of Manitobans. Mr. Deputy Speaker, also in our $200 million plan, we're seeking to enhance psychiatry career programs, psychology positions, and more, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
The Honourable Member for McPhillips.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, earlier today, Manitoba Hydro indicated that they will be updating their multi-year general rate application with the Public Utility Board and filing at 2% based off the government's historic initiative to reduce the debt guarantee fee and the water rental fee by 1/2. Can the Minister of Finance please share with the House what these lower rates will mean for Manitobans?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I thank the member for the question. Last week, our government took historic action to reduce the debt guarantee and water rental rates made by Hydro to government. Today, Hydro responded. In lieu of these historic payment reductions, Hydro has informed the PUB that it will seek a much lower rate increase than was in their initial rate application. This will save the average Hydro ratepayer hundreds of dollars while Hydro stabilizes its debt. While the NDP continues to mislead Manitobans with a fake rate freeze, the passage of Bill 36 and our government's historic action to reduce Hydro payments is stabilizing Manitoba Hydro and keeping rates low for all Manitobans.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Notre Dame.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, exposure to lead can have negative effects, particularly for children under the age of 7. The lead in soil testing in Winnipeg report outlines several areas of concern that include 5 parks and a school. Community members want full disclosure on what areas are being tested and the outcome. Will the minister provide the House the full list of sampled locations today?
The Honourable Minister for Environment, Climate and Parks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and our government is committed to protecting the environment and protecting the health and safety of our Manitobans and our children, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We know that under the NDP, the reports for lead were hidden for years, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Manitobans had no idea when they would even send their kids to school what they were playing with on the playgrounds of Manitoba playgrounds, particularly in the city of Winnipeg, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We'll take no lessons from members opposite on lead.
The Honourable Member for Notre Dame on a follow-up question.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. There was a time not too long ago when historical sources of lead were thought to be low and safe enough for folks to participate in the community. And now we know that there are no known safe levels of lead for children. And that's why I'm here asking these questions to this minister. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, community members are asking why active industries in downtown Winnipeg weren't part of this testing. They're asking why university researchers and local community groups were not involved in the consultation of the creation of this report. They know that over 2,000 sites were examined. Will the minister provide the full list of examined sites today?
Right on. The Honourable Minister for Environment, Climate and Parks.
Thank you again, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And Certainly, we know that our government conducted soil testing to over 40 different neighborhoods throughout Winnipeg, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We know over 2,000 samples were taken from 43 schools and 147 parks, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Tell you what, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm happy to report to the House that 94.1% of those results were below the guidelines, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Our government is taking action when it comes to lead.
Time for oral questions has expired. Petitions. The Honourable Member for Transcona.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly, of Manitoba. The background for this petition is as follows. Number one, residents of River Park South community in Winnipeg are disturbed by the increasing noise levels caused by traffic on the South Perimeter Highway. Number two, the South Perimeter Highway functions as a transport route for semi-trucks traveling across Canada, making this stretch of the perimeter especially loud. Number three, according to the South Perimeter Noise Study conducted in 2019, the traffic levels are expected to increase significantly over the next 20 years, and backyard noise levels have already surpassed 65 decibels. Number four, Seniac Road, which runs alongside the South Perimeter, contributes additional truck traffic, causing increased noise and air pollution. Number five, residents face a decade of construction on the South Perimeter, making this an appropriate time to add noise mitigation for the South Perimeter to these projects. Number six, the current barriers between the South Perimeter Highway and the homes of the River Park South residents are a berm and a wooden fence, neither of which are effective at reducing the traffic noise. We therefore petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows. Number one, to urge the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure to consult with noise specialists and other experts to help determine the most effective way to reduce the traffic noise and to commit to meaningful action to address resident concern. And number two, to urge the Minister of Transportation to help address this issue with a noise barrier wall along residential portions of the South Perimeter from St. Anne's Road to St. Mary's Road and for River Park South residents. This petition, Deputy Speaker, is signed by many Manitobans.
The Honourable Member for Burrows.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly. To the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba. The background to this petition is as follows. According to Census 2021, Punjabi is the fourth most spoken language in Canada, and there are 33,315 people in Manitoba whose native language is Punjabi. Thousands of Punjabi newcomers are coming to Manitoba as students and as immigrants looking to call this province home. People of Punjabi origin contribute a great deal to the social and economic development of Canada and Manitoba in fields such as education, science, health, business, and politics. In coming to Manitoba, Punjabi newcomers make sacrifices, including distance from their cultural roots and language. Many Punjabi parents and families want their children to retain their language and keep a continued cultural appreciation. Manitoba has many good bilingual programs in public schools for children and teens available in other languages, including French, Ukrainian, Ojibwe, Filipino, Cree, Hebrew, and Spanish. Punjabi bilingual programs for children and teens, as well as Punjabi language instruction at a college and university level, could similarly teach and maintain Punjabi language and culture. Punjabi bilingual instruction will help cross-cultural friendships, relationships, and marriages and prepare young people to be multilingual professionals. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the provincial government to take steps to implement Punjabi bilingual programs in public schools similar to existing bilingual programs, and take steps to implement Punjabi language instruction in other levels of education in Manitoba. This petition has been signed by Prabteshwar Sidhu, Kamaldeep Singh Sidhu, Amanjeet Kunar, and many Manitobans.
The honourable member for Flin Flon.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba. The background to this petition is as follows. Number one, home care workers in Manitoba provide skilled and compassionate care that helps better the quality of life for thousands of Manitobans. Number two, robust home care services are proven to reduce the strain on health services and demand for hospital beds. Number three, home care reduces the demand for long-term care beds as it allows people to continue living in their own space. Number four, studies show that a third of the 200,000 Canadians living in long-term care homes could stay home with proper home care support. Number five, investing in home care saves money, as daily services cost half the price of a long-term care bed and 1/7 of the daily cost of a hospital bed. Number six, the provincial government's cuts to home care in Manitoba has resulted in chronic staffing issues that caused the WRHA to cancel 27,000 home care appointments in the month of April 2022 alone. Number seven, many clients in Manitoba only receive home care services once a day, whereas countries such as Denmark offer up to 6 visits per day. Number eight, home care workers in Manitoba are paid poor wages, are offered little benefits, lack of sick time, and are overworked, resulting in difficulty retaining and attracting workers. Number nine, home care workers have been without a contract since 2017 due to this provincial government's interference in labor negotiations. Number 10, investing in home care is a proactive approach that would save the province millions of dollars, as well as allow more Manitobans to age in place. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the Minister of Health and the Minister of Seniors and Long-Term Care to immediately increase investment in home care services so that home care workers can be paid a fair wage and clients can receive the level of service they require. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This petition was signed by many Manitobans.
The honourable member for Elmwood.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly. The background to this petition is as follows. Number one, cities across Canada and the United States, including Chicago, Washington, D.C., Salinas, California, and Orillia, Ontario, are offering home security rebate programs that enhance public safety and allow for more efficient use of their policing resources. Number two, home security surveillance systems protect homes and businesses by potentially deterring burglaries, reducing homeowners and businesses' insurance costs. Number three, home security surveillance systems can also be remotely monitored with personal electronic devices such as smartphones. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the provincial government to work with municipalities to establish a province-wide tax rebate or other incentive program to encourage residents and businesses to purchase approved home and business security protection systems. And this petition is signed by many, many Manitobans.
The honourable member for the Pas-Kamisak.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly. The background to this petition is as follows. Number one, Provincial Road 224 serves Peguis First Nation, Fisher River Cree Nation, and surrounding communities. This road is in dire need of substantial repairs. Number two, the road has been in poor condition for years and has numerous potholes, uneven driving surfaces, and extremely narrow shoulders. Number three, due to recent population growth in the area, there has been increased vehicle and pedestrian use of Provincial Road 224. Number four, without repair, Provincial Road 224 will continue to pose a hazard to the many Manitobans who use it on a regular basis. Number five, concerned Manitobans are requesting that Provincial Road 224 be assessed and repaired urgently to improve safety for its users. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the Minister of Infrastructure to complete an assessment of Provincial Road 224 and implement the appropriate repairs using public funds as quickly as possible. This petition has been signed by many, many fine Manitobans. I was there.
The honourable member for the Maples.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba. The background to this petition is as follows. Number one, according to Census 2021, Punjabi is the fourth most spoken language in Canada, and there are 33,315 people in Manitoba whose native language is Punjabi. Number two, thousands of Punjabi newcomers are coming to Manitoba as a student and as an immigrant looking to call this province home. People of Punjabi origin contribute a great deal to the social and economic development of Canada and Manitoba in fields such as education, science, health, business, and politics. Number three, in coming to Manitoba, Punjabi newcomers make sacrifice including distance from their cultural roots and language. Many Punjabi parents and families want their children to retain their language and keep a continued cultural appreciation. Number four, Manitoba has many good bilingual programs in public school for children and teens available in other languages, including French, Ukrainian, Ojibwe, Filipino, Cree, Hebrew, and Spanish. Punjabi bilingual program for children and teens, as well as Punjabi language instruction at college and university levels, could similarly teach and maintain Punjabi language and culture. Number five, Punjabi bilingual instruction would help cross-cultural friendship, relationship, and marriages, and prepare young people to be multilingual professionals. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the provincial government to take steps to implement Punjabi bilingual program in Punjabi schools similar to existing bilingual program, and take steps to implement Punjabi language instruction in other level of education in Manitoba. This has been signed by Poonam, Simran, and Priyanka Verma, and many more. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
The honourable member for Point Douglas.
Miigwech, Deputy Speaker. I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba. The background to this petition is as follows. 1. According to Census 2021, Punjabi is the fourth most spoken language in Canada, and there are 33,315 people in Manitoba whose native language is Punjabi. 2. Thousands of Punjabi newcomers are coming to Manitoba as students and as immigrants looking to call this province home. Most of Punjabi's origin contribute a great deal to the social and economic development of Canada and Manitoba in fields such as education, science, health, business, and politics. 3. In coming to Manitoba, Punjabi newcomers make sacrifices including distance from their cultural roots and language. Many Punjabi parents and families want their children to retain their language and keep a continued cultural appreciation. 4. Manitoba has many good bilingual programs in public schools for children and teens available in other languages, including French, Ukrainian, Ojibwe, Filipino, Cree, Hebrew, and Spanish. Punjabi bilingual programs for children and teens, as well as Punjabi language instruction at a college and university level, could similarly teach and maintain Punjabi language and culture. 5. Punjabi bilingual instruction will help cross-cultural friendships, relationships, and marriages, and prepare young people to be multilingual professionals. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows: to urge the provincial government to take steps and implement Punjabi bilingual programs in public schools similar to existing bilingual programs, and to take steps to implement Punjabi language instruction in other levels of education in Manitoba. And this has been signed by Narinder Singh, Prince Baljit, Sandeep Singh, and many other Manitobans.
The honourable member for River Heights.
Yeah, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I wish to present the following petition to the Legislative Assembly. The background to this petition is as follows. A hearing aid is a battery-powered electronic device designed to improve an individual's ability to perceive sound. Worn in or behind a person's ear, they make some sounds louder, helping people hear better when it's quiet and when it's noisy. People who suffer hearing loss, whether due to aging, illness, employment, or accident, not only lose the ability to communicate effectively with friends, family, or colleagues, they also can experience unemployment, social isolation, and struggles with mental health. Hearing loss can also impact the safety of an individual with hearing loss, as it affects the ability to hear cars coming, safety alarms, call 911, etc. A global commission on the state of the research for dementia care and prevention released an updated consensus report in July 2020, identifying 12 key risk factors for dementia and cognitive decline. The strongest risk factor that was indicated was hearing loss. It was calculated that up to 8% of the total number of dementia cases could potentially be avoided with management of hearing loss. Hearing aids are therefore essential to the mental health and well-being of Manitobans, especially to those who are at significant risk of dementia, Alzheimer's, a disorder of the brain affecting cognition in the ever-growing senior population. Audiologists are healthcare professionals who help patients decide which kind of hearing aid will work best for them based on the type of hearing loss, patient's age, and ability to manage small devices, lifestyle, and ability to afford. The cost of hearing aids can be prohibitive to many Manitobans depending on their income and circumstances. Hearing aids cost an average $995 to $4,000 per year, and many professionals say the hearing aids only work at their best for 5 years. Manitoba residents under the age of 18 who require a hearing aid, as prescribed by an otolaryngologist or audiologist, will receive either an 80% reimbursement from Manitoba Health of a fixed amount for an analog device, up to a maximum of $500 per year, or 80% of a fixed amount for a digital or analog programmable device, up to a maximum of $1,800. However, this reimbursement is not available to Manitobans who need the device who are over the age of 18, which will result in financial hardship for many young people entering the workforce, students, and families. In addition, seniors, representing 14.3% of Manitoba's population, are not eligible for reimbursement despite being the group most likely in need of a hearing aid. Most insurance companies only provide a minimal partial cost of a hearing aid, and many Manitobans, especially retired persons, old age pensioners, and other low-income earners do not have access to health insurance plans. The province of Quebec's Hearing Devices Program covers all costs related to hearing aids and assistive listening devices, including the purchase, repair, and replacement. Alberta offers subsidies to all seniors, 65 and over, and low-income adults, 18 to 64, once every 5 years. New Brunswick provides coverage for the purchase and maintenance not covered by other agencies or private health insurance plans, as well as assistance for those for whom the purchase would cause financial hardship. Manitobans over age 18 are only eligible for support for hearing aids if they are receiving employment and income assistance, and the reimbursement only provides a maximum of $500 an year. We petition the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba as follows. 1. To urge the provincial government to consider hearing loss as a medical treatment under Manitoba Health. 2. To urge the provincial government to provide income-based coverage for hearing aids to all who need them, as hearing has been proven to be essential to Manitobans' cognitive, mental, and social health and well-being. Signed by Terry Huvel, Leah Malowski, and Lucille Robert.
Are there any other petitions? Seeing none. Grievances. Orders of the day, government business. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Could you please call for a second reading, Bill number 3, the Vital Statistics Amendment Act name registration, followed by Bill number 5, the Demise of the Crown Act, various acts amended. And then following that, Bill number 6, the Manitoba Public Insurance Corporation Amendment Act, Bill 8, the Off-Road Trail Safety and Maintenance Act, Bill number 9, the Liquor, Gaming, Cannabis Control Amendment and Liquor and Lotteries Corporation Amendment Act, and Bill number 10, the Liquor, Gaming, and Cannabis Control Amendment Act, Social Responsibility Fee Repeal.
It has been announced by the Honourable Government House Leader that this afternoon we will consider for debate on second reading in the following order: Bill 3, the Vital Statistics Amendment Act, name registration; Bill 5, the Demise of the Crown Act, various acts amended; Bill 6, the Manitoba Public Insurance Corporation Amendment Act; Bill 8, the Off-Road Trails Safety and Maintenance Act; and Bill 9, the Liquor, Gaming, and Cannabis Control Amendment and Manitoba Liquor and Lotteries Corporation Amendment Act, and also Bill 10, the Liquor, Gaming, and Cannabis Control Amendment Act, Social Responsibility Fee repealed. So, with that information in hand, we will now proceed to second reading for Bill 3, the resuming debate, on second reading of Bill 3, the Vital Statistics Amendment Act. That is the question period, and I will just get the right guidance here. We do have 10 minutes remaining. Just a moment. Okay. I just want to make sure. Okay, so there is 10 minutes remaining in the question period. I will, by way of reminder, questions may be addressed to the Minister by any member in the following sequence. The first by the official opposition critic or designate, subsequent questions asked by critics or designates from other recognized opposition parties, subsequent questions asked by each independent member, remaining questions asked by any opposition members, and no question or answer shall exceed 45 seconds. The floor is open for questions. The honourable member for Kiiwetinoong.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So Bill 3, the Vital Statistics Amendment Act, name registration, is very similar, if not identical, to Bill 236, which was raised in May of this year, the Vital Statistics Amendment Act. And I'm just wondering, when the minister voted against that bill, I'm just wondering, why was that issue wrong 6 months ago, but the right thing to do today?
The Honourable Minister for Labour, Consumer Protection and Government Services.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Well, I think this question was asked and answered before. There is consultations that had to happen that we went through with the Grand Chiefs and other communities. We had the Inuit community, we had the Manitoba Métis Federation, that we wanted to get their advice on legislation of this type, along with other language groups, so we could include diacritics. There are things such as accents. You can see in the legislation that we have an outline of some of the characters that are acceptable to give people comfort that they can put forth names that will be found in legislation, and we can add more characters as
Minister's time has expired. The honourable member for Tyndall Park.
Speaker, and how is this government going to address the multi-jurisdictional issues that individuals will face with name recognition in other provinces?
The honourable minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Well, a great question. We do communicate with other provinces on the type of information that we accept, and I think even more critical is the type of information the federal government will accept. We know that there may be challenges registering a name for a passport, a social insurance number, a status card, perhaps a Canada Child benefit, and we're working with the federal government so that they are aware that this is happening in Manitoba. I'm sure, Mr. Deputy Speaker, you know that many of us we fill out online forms, and when those were first designed, they had a limited character that they could accept because of the cost of storage. That is now expanded to larger characters or more characters.
The minister's time has expired. The honourable member for Kiiwetinoong.
Mr. Speaker, I know that this government does not want to use the words colonization and oppression, but I'm wondering if the minister can explain how not being able to give a child a traditional name, according to the traditional spelling, is a form of continued colonization and oppression.
The honourable minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Well, I'm not sure I quite get where the member is going. This is to enable people to register their traditional name, and they can do so. We have been accepting those traditional names in Manitoba for several years. This legislation makes it legal, even though we have been accepting those names. And sometimes there is advice given to people that a name would not be accepted, and what we recommend they do is bring it forward to Vital Statistics, and they will work with the family to make sure that we can accommodate what they want to have as a traditional name. As you can see in the legislation, we will accept many of the characters and the diacritics.
The minister's time has expired. The honourable member for Flin Flon.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and while I applaud the minister for introducing the member from Kiiwetinoong's bill, what I want to know is, because this will be specific to Manitoba, what plan is in place so that when people go to use the expanded capabilities that will be available in Manitoba, what kind of information will they be given at that time to know that it won't work to get a passport or a status card or another jurisdiction, so that people are aware of the limitations?
The honourable minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. When someone comes to register a name, they may be a challenge in other jurisdictions. We do have that discussion with them, and unfortunately, some have chosen to register a name which will then be acceptable, say, to Canada, which is not in standing with what they want to have for a cultural name. We understand that other jurisdictions are not at the stage that Manitoba is. We are working with those jurisdictions to make them aware of things that they may be able to accommodate, but there's lots of limitations out there that we face all the time. You know, when one of our sons was born, we didn't know how many children we were going to have, so we gave him 2 middle names. He can't fit that in any form, so he uses his 2 initials. That doesn't work on a passport. That
The
doesn't
minister's
work.
time has expired. The honourable member for Kiwatanuk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For most First Nation communities, in particular remote First Nation communities, a lot of their identification is actually, or their first identification that they utilize is their status card. And according to the minister, this is not applicable to the status card. So I'm just wondering, when the minister talks about working with the federal government to now implement that on that level also, specifically, what is he doing to advocate for that?
The honourable minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So we are cautioning people that they may or may not be acceptable for identifications such as a status card. That is a discussion that they will have to have with the particular application there. The federal government may accept it. They are actively working to accept different characters, and we are communicating with them and with a variety of federal departments to make sure they're aware of what's happening in Manitoba, that individuals may be coming to get federal identification or application for funding, that they need to be working to accept some of these characters. They have told us in past that they are able to do some of this, and we'll work with them to make sure that can happen.
The honourable member for Kiwatanuk.
I guess one of the final questions I have is when we talk about working together on Indigenous issues, and especially in the spirit of reconciliation, I'm just wondering, being that we brought forth Bill 236, which basically is identical to this bill that the minister brought forward, is why did the minister not reach out to members opposite to also help in drafting of this bill?
The honourable minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So we had been working on this legislation for some time because people have been recognizing that they wanted to register different names, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And we found that the members' legislation that was introduced was quite different from the path that we were going down. It, for instance, did not have the characters that we have been recommending here. In addition, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we needed to have consultation with a variety of groups in Manitoba. That's a very important part of this piece of legislation, Mr. Deputy Speaker. That was not done on the private member's bill. We have done much of that. There is still more to do. I have meetings that have been arranged and scheduled that we can continue those consultations so that we make sure that we represent
The minister's time has expired. The honourable member for Kiwatanuk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The minister had mentioned that they're in fact working on this for, quote, some time. I'm wondering if the minister could put a timeline as to exactly when he started working on this legislation.
The honourable minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I have to go back to the records to get the answer for that. We have been, as I said, accommodating these requests in Vital Statistics for many years, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Came from a variety of individuals. Some of them were Indigenous, some of them were Icelandic, and we would work with those individuals to make sure that we could accept the characters that they wanted to register. And we realized when we were doing this that this did not reflect the legislation. So we looked down the path on how we would have to modernize that legislation, and this is the modernization that we have in place with us today, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
The honourable member for Kiwatanuk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So specifically then, with Bill 236 that was raised 6 months ago, I'm wondering if the minister can be more specific with exactly who he consulted with and the groups he consulted with in the 6 months from the defeat of Bill 236 to today.
The honourable minister.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I do not have the list in front of me, but I can tell the member opposite that I was consulted with all of the Grand Chiefs at the time that they were in office, and we still continue to do so. We consulted with the Inuit organization. We consulted with the Manitoba Métis Federation. We consulted with a variety of other individuals and groups that are out there looking to make sure that their culture and their particular language was reflected in the legislation that we would have. So it was not just Indigenous groups, Mr. Deputy Speaker, but a wide variety of individuals.
Are there any further questions? Seeing none, the floor is open for debate. The Honourable Member for Kiiwetinoong.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for the opportunity to put a few words for Bill 3, the Vital Statistics Amendment Act, which is very similar to Bill 236, the Vital Statistics Amendment Act, which actually is exactly specific and detailed in its duplication. So that does beg the question of whether or not this government is just simply going through the motions of reconciliation instead of actually coming forth in a true spirit of reconciliation and collaboration to work together with all members of Manitoba, and in particular, in this situation, members across the aisle and within this chamber. As an Indigenous MLA, bringing forth the amendment to Vital Statistics Amendment Act to allow for traditional name recognition on your Manitoba health card and in your identification within Manitoba, it was vitally important that that be raised as an issue. And it is something that, if you look at kind of the history of Indigenous communities and Indigenous people here in Manitoba and across Canada for that matter, it's been a long-standing kind of colonization approach and oppression approach to Indigenous people, to not allow them to give names that were inherently theirs, given down, passed through culture and passed through family, but rather go and ask a government body or governing body's permission to say your name, to give your name. And in fact of the matter, Mr. Deputy Speaker, those bodies also changed your name because it didn't fit that criteria. It didn't fit in that block. It didn't fit within that parameter that was established by a government body, which was led by oppression. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as Indigenous people here in Manitoba, and I stand here and I can say we and I can say I when I'm referring to that because this affects me, this affects my family. And if I go back far enough, it also affects even my name and the spelling of my name. And if you look, and this goes also across international boundaries, across Canada, across Manitoba, where you see maybe your name mentioned in a different town, in a different province, in a different country, but it's spelled differently. And it's spelled differently not because it's different, it's because it was deemed at a time that that person that was in charge of being able to do that and being able to kind of limit and label you by your name, maybe didn't know how to spell it, maybe didn't know how to sound it, so it was easier for them. So my last name, and I know I'm not privy to say my last name here in the chamber, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is spelt at least 4 different ways in surrounding communities around my home First Nation community. For that very reason. For that very reason of when they went up to the Indian agent and their family and their ancestors went up to that Indian agent, no, this is how your name, this is how I'm going to spell your name. This is not how it fits in my dictionary, how it fits in my forms that I have in front of me to kind of list you and register you. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that was just shameful. And you talk about going back forth, and there's the specific call to action, TRC call to action number 17, which directs all the governments in Canada to recognize Indigenous names. And that was not easy. People think that that's something that's, well, of course, that's a given. Why would you not be recognized by your name that was given to you by your grandfather, by your grandparents, by your ancestors? Why is that so difficult? And the question is, why is that so difficult? Why was that such a hardship to be able to be recognized in what you do? But still, we're having this discussion today, 2022, still having that discussion. That's why I asked the minister, when did this kind of come on your radar? When did you start discussing this? Because 6-7 years of this government not having this, they waited until an Indigenous MLA raised this issue to say we're going to raise this issue. And that is nothing but a reactive approach. That's not a proactive approach to be able to deal with this. And I'm not going to apologize and say, you know what, I'm sorry, I'm wrong for shaming the government for having to do the right thing, because I'm not. Because we shouldn't have to do that. We shouldn't have to raise the issue to kind of poke the government and say, hey, this is something you need to do. Do the right thing. Everybody in Manitoba, everybody in Canada, everybody in the world is calling for the reconciliation towards Indigenous people here in Manitoba and Canada. So it is the right thing to do. But instead, what is the right thing to do by this government? Oh, we're going to take this legislation, we're going to copy it a little bit, we'll tweak it a little bit, we'll change it a little bit, so we can say it's our own. And that is shameful. That just goes against the very issue of reconciliation. Mr. Deputy Speaker, that when the minister brought forth this legislation, he says it's for all levels of government to enable residential school survivors and their families to reclaim names changed by the residential school system by waiving the cost for a period of 5 years for the name change process and the revision of official identity documents such as birth certificates, passports, driver's license, health cards, status cards, and social insurance numbers. So again, putting a limit on that, putting a deadline to say, okay, we're going to do this, but we'll do this for 5 years. Very similar to what the government has done, the federal government is doing now, to be able to say, when it comes time to residential schools, okay, you have to meet this deadline. You have to fit within this 2-year period, this 5-year period. And after that, get over it. And that's exactly what this government is saying by only waiving this issue for 5 years. Only talking about this for 5 years. Only talking about this in a response. And it isn't a response to their failed attempts to actually have concrete reconciliation. A response to voting no against Orange Shirt Day. A response to voting no against Bill 236. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, this government needs to step up and not say we're doing our bare minimum, because that is exactly how it's been. As I mentioned in my questions earlier, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as Indigenous people here in Manitoba, primarily their identification and our identification has always been first and foremost.
Order, please. Hey, I just say to the members at the back by the water, the members for Radisson, Springfield, Richot, Fort White, and Steinbach, please take the conversation in the hall or tone it down or on the loge, but it's getting a little loud, please. The Honourable Member for Kiwatanuk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for pointing out the fact that this is vitally important to us, but not to members opposite, to be able to hear these kind of words on the record. And as I was saying, Mr. Deputy Speaker, first and foremost and primarily, identification for Indigenous people here in Manitoba has been their status card, has been their quote, Indian status card. Not First Nation, not Indigenous, but the Indian status card. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when it comes time to Manitoba being able to do that, so first and foremost, that's the piece of identification that Indigenous communities, in particular northern and isolated communities, have to be their first and foremost piece of identification. So this bill does not help that. This bill does not recognize that. Yes, the minister says this. We're speaking to the government, we're speaking to the federal government to make the changes. We're saying what they should do. But again, no concrete action to be able to do that. Because, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this then is allowing Indigenous communities and Indigenous people here in Manitoba to make this change on their Manitoba identification. And in particular, Mr. Deputy Speaker, on their Manitoba health card, of which time and time again, we've heard this government and this health minister not even recognize Indigenous health in Manitoba, but rather refer that to the federal government. So then it begs the question, and you can't blame Indigenous communities to say, well, okay, that's great. I can have my proper name spelt on my Manitoba health card, but it's useless. It's useless because I don't get Manitoba health. I don't get the benefits of Manitoba health. I'm told immediately, your federal responsibility. You're on reserve, go to Ottawa. You're on reserve, go see the federal government. But at the same time, this government here in Manitoba is trying to say they're in fact doing the right thing by saying, oh, we're going to acknowledge this, we're going to recognize this. But again, it's just for show. There's no concrete action to be able to take that forward. There's no concrete action to be able to say, okay, we're going to allow, and again, Mr. Deputy Speaker, using that word allow like it's something that Indigenous peoples need to be asking for when it was something that was inherently theirs in the first place. Yet this government is saying we're going to allow this to happen now. Why? Because we want to look like we're doing our job on reconciliation. We want to look like we're doing the right thing for Indigenous people here in Manitoba. And again, that's just for show and a reactive approach to the failures of this government in regards to Indigenous people. So when we sat here in May and debated Bill 236, it was talked out by this government. It was put down by this government. But again, the government comes, puts a little tweak to it. Oh, we're going to put a little, now we can put an asterisk as part of it. We can put a semicolon as part of it. We can put a question mark as part of it now. And now we're going to say now it's complete. Now it encompasses everything. Well, Bill 236 in May still encompassed all of that. It still allowed that to happen. It still allowed us to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation. But Mr. Deputy Speaker, let's not sugarcoat it. That piece of legislation that was to better things for Indigenous people in Manitoba was brought forward by an Indigenous MLA. And this government defeated that. This government spoke down to that. And instead took that idea, took the very same idea, and tried to make it their own. But Manitobans aren't fooled. And Indigenous communities are also not going to be fooled. They know exactly what was happening there, including that family that was here for bill debate on 236. They stood there, and we still keep in touch with them today. And I just spoke with them just the other day about their child and that name recognition that they wanted to do. But again, now this government is saying, oh, we're going to do this now. Well, why not do it then? Why take that opportunity to then try and kind of take the credit, take the responsibility? And Mr. Deputy Speaker, this should not be about credit. This should not be about the PC saying, oh, we can check this box and say, we've done this. Don't you know? We did this for Indigenous communities. We did this for Indigenous people. And that's exactly what they're trying to do. So they can check the box and say, you know what, we have this checklist of reconciliation topics that we want to do. So now we can say we did that. And that's our claim to fame. And if that's your claim to fame on Indigenous issues, that's shameful. Mr. Deputy Speaker, perhaps when it comes time to a quote-unquote win for this government on reconciliation, would it not have been better to partner with Indigenous MLAs in May on Bill 236 to say, yes, let's all stand there and do the right thing? We partnered earlier today on a piece of legislation that we all knew was the best thing for Manitoba. So I'm seeing by them bringing this forward that the PCs also agreed that this was the best thing for Manitoba. This was the best thing, a better thing, a step forward for Indigenous people here in Manitoba. But didn't take that opportunity to stand together back then in May. Instead, took it as a chance to say, we're going to steal that credit. We're going to take that away from somebody else, let alone take that away from Indigenous politicians here in Manitoba that are trying to do the right thing, that actually have and listen and take the voice of Indigenous people here in Manitoba and bring that forward here. Because when I brought forth Bill 236 in May, that's what that was. That was hearing in Indigenous communities, hearing Indigenous people, Indigenous parents saying, I want to be able to do this. I want to be able to name my child in a traditional way that I was never able to do, that my parents and my grandparents were never able to do, because way back when, an Indian agent told me that you can't do that. Sorry, I don't know how to spell that, so I'm going to spell it the way I want to spell it. So now we're going back to try and fix that. But we're not, by this government saying we're not trying to fix that, they're instead saying we're now going to allow that. Like it is something that Indigenous people had to ask permission for. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, when we bring forth this piece of legislation to be able to recognize that, I do, again, as I said at the beginning of my comments, it is something that most people would take for granted. You know, if somebody comes out with the name John Doe or whatever it may be, and somebody says, oh yes, that's my name, that's great. That was also my father's name, my grandfather's name, my grandmother's name. So I could take that forward. Oh yeah, that sounds all great. And people say, that's fantastic, I'm allowed to do that. Again, first off, using that word allowed. But secondly, what if even just that simple name change? That name John, now somebody says, oh sorry, I can't spell it the way we traditionally spell it, J-O-H-N or J-O-N. Now we have to spell it totally different because that doesn't fit in the parameter of that person sitting across from there, that governing body sitting across from there, and says, no, that's not it. And again, that defeats that purpose, that defeats that kind of path towards reconciliation and going back and trying to assimilate and exterminate Indigenous people into a different system, into a colonial system that Indigenous people are not a part of, don't want to be a part of, and is still being imposed on Indigenous communities today. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this, I've said many times in debate on a number of different issues that it was kind of a start, that the PCs have done and introduced legislation as a start. But this isn't even at the starting point yet. This is just reactive approaches and reactive responses to long-standing issues here in Manitoba, let alone Canada. So this is just kind of a feel-good bill for this PC government to say, this is what we're going to do. But for Indigenous communities, it doesn't really have an effect for you in the real world. Because as I said, a status card for Indigenous person is primarily a way to go here in Canada. A passport is a way to go. And this piece of legislation does not help that, does not help that process. So now an Indigenous person can say, oh, this is my name. This is my name in Manitoba. But this isn't my name when I go to the US. This isn't my name when I go across the country. Can you imagine the difficulty that may happen as an Indigenous person who already is very kind of discriminated against on a number of different issues? So now an Indigenous person is going to carry two pieces of identification, one with your name spelled this way, one with your name spelled that way. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, that gets to be more confusing than anything. And I'm sure there's going to come a time where that Indigenous person is going to be accused of carrying false identification, because that identification is not going to be recognized across the board. Be recognized in Manitoba, but also it's probably not going to be recognized in Manitoba Hospital because you're not even going to be allowed to go there. We've raised a number of different issues on those very things about healthcare in Manitoba and having that recognition. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this piece of legislation goes to a point, but again, the bare minimum. And it's the bare minimum that this government brings forward. And again, this, in the bigger picture, just causes more confusion and will cause more confusion. Because as I said, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when you have now potentially two pieces of identification, because as Indigenous communities, we also take on the membership. So we also have that ability in our Indigenous communities to create and apply for those status cards. But now, when you have your birth certificate from Manitoba that has the spelling the way that you're intended it to spell, but now you can't take that forward, what are those going to be then? When you have a block that's going to say, for example, 15 blocks of letters that you could put, letters, symbols, or whatever it may be. So now, you now have to leave still big chunks of that blank because that won't apply for federal identification. And it's something that can happen. It can absolutely happen. But again, that would mean that this government has to do more than the bare minimum. And they have no intention of doing that. They just want to say, we've done our part, somebody else. You have a hard time with a passport, not my problem. You have a hard time with a status card, not my problem. You have a hard time with some kind of piece of federal identification, not my problem. I've done what I could. I've done my bare minimum on my end here in Manitoba. So that's why in the question and answer part of this debate, we did ask the question, what is the minister doing then to lobby the federal government to also come on board with this? And it's not a matter of, you knock on the door, you pull on the coat of the federal minister, say, please, please do something. Let's take a lead. Take a lead for once. Be the government that takes that lead and does it. And the member from Save Vittel always, in his debate last week, talked on a different issue about shooting for the middle. And that's exactly what this government is doing. Shooting for the middle. Not trying to set the standard, not trying to set the bar, but shooting for the middle. Shooting for the middle, and what's going to happen? You're going to go lower than that. Because that's your bar, that's your expectation, and that's the height you want to be, is the middle of the road and average. And this government can really take a lead on this very issue. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, we're talking about Bill 236 being brought forward and defeated, and now we're here with Bill 3. But we're also standing behind the intent of Bill 3. We're not standing here trying to defeat it. We're standing here saying, let's do more. Don't just do the bare minimum. Let's get out there and ensure that nothing falls through the cracks here. That Indigenous people and traditional people in Manitoba and Canada that want to have their name as it was made in their family applied on their identification, not just in Manitoba, but across Canada. So there is no confusion. So when those people and those folks that want to be able to say, this is my name, this is how I say my name, this is how I spell my name, do not have to go to a different governing body and say, okay, that was it over there. But this is, I'm applying over here, so I have to stay there. Fine, I'll change my name to be it over here. And again, as Indigenous people, when we come time to a lot of racism, you just know, and as Indigenous people, we know and we've experienced that time and time again, that there's folks in society that don't have to have an excuse to be racist to Indigenous people. They're looking just for every single way to do that. And this is absolutely a way in for that. This is absolutely something that folks that want to demean, kick down, and oppress Indigenous people will use this, because there's a gap here. There's a gap in this legislation. There is a piece missing. There is an advocacy for Indigenous people missing from this government outside of the province of Manitoba, outside of the city of Winnipeg. So all we're asking, all I'm asking as Indigenous MLA is let's close that gap. Let's ensure that we can do this across all of Manitoba, across all of Canada, and across all aspects of Indigenous identification. Not the bare minimum, because that's what this piece of legislation is doing, is the bare minimum. And this government can absolutely do more. And it's not a matter of let's blame the feds, let's call the feds, let's pawn off that responsibility, because that's the way this government has been operating in its 6+ years of government. When it comes time to Indigenous issues, we're going to put that responsibility off. We're going to do what we can. We're going to look like we're doing what we can. But you're doing more, and you can do more, and you should do more. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's not a matter of, okay, we like I said earlier, we've checked that box, we've changed this so Indigenous people can use their traditional names on identification. That's it, we're done. Let's wipe our hands of it, let's move on. Hopefully we'll never have to talk about another Indigenous issue again until election time, or until September 29th, or whatever it may be when an issue comes forward again. We're going to do the bare minimum. Let's not. Let's do more. And I call on this government to do more. I call on this minister to strengthen this legislation, to be open to amendments, to be able to strengthen this legislation, to then now say this legislation is not only here, but now we've come up with that solution for the federal government on their behalf. We've now allowed this system to be able to incorporate with the other system. So there is no gaps, there is no confusion for Indigenous communities and Indigenous people when it comes time to registering their names and registering them in the way it was intended to be. Because as I said, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that it's not a matter of let's do this to a certain point. Let's do it and see it through. As I said, my name is spelt at least 4 or 5 different ways just in my surrounding communities. And those are also my relatives. Those are also my family. But if you looked at it, just simply in a checklist or a directory of names, you would never know that. You would never know that because that was taken away from us. Those names were taken away from us because of whoever sat across that table while you were being registered, while your child was being registered, while you're then trying to work into the colonial system of Manitoba, of Canada. So let's get back to addressing that, and let's address that in a proper way. Can we change things in the past? Can we do that name change on a mass population in the past? Maybe, maybe not. But we can absolutely change that from this day going forward. And we could strengthen this legislation to be able to do that. Not just the bare minimum, because that's what this is doing. This is saying, I'm only able to do what I can do here in Manitoba. Well, no, you can do so much more than that. But I don't know if you're afraid to come off as an advocate on behalf of Indigenous issues and traditional names. And if that's the case, and you're afraid of doing that, then why are you here? Why are you afraid to be an advocate? Why are you afraid to step out of the box, to step out of the comfort zone, to actually truly represent Indigenous communities and Indigenous people when it comes time to their traditional names? Because, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that's what's important here. It's important to get out there and do more. Be complete. Take this issue on and solve this issue, resolve this issue, move forward in a true spirit of reconciliation. Because as the TRC calls to action, when it comes time to all levels of government to be able to do that. So let's work together to do that. Let's work together to actually strengthen this so that there is no gap. There is no gap when you step outside of Winnipeg, when you step outside of Manitoba, even when you step outside of Canada. Because, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if you have two pieces of identification, here's my Manitoba identification, here's my national identification, and they're different, you can just imagine the confusion that's going to cause. Let alone confusion to cause for Indigenous people that have always been inherently kind of oppressed in that way. So I do, and I support the intent of Bill 3, but I also call for it to be strengthened so that gap is closed. And it's not a matter of I'm calling on this minister to write a letter to the federal minister to do your part. No, let's truly work together to do that. Let's truly work together across this aisle, across jurisdictional boundaries to truly make that effect and truly have that intent that as Indigenous people, there is no more gap. There is no more falling through the cracks. It is something that is inherently yours. Your name should inherently be yours. And it's not a matter of just, oh, here's a name, I'm just going to make it up to be whatever it is. There is a real cultural connection to a spiritual name in not only Indigenous communities, but traditional communities and traditional homelands across the world. So there's inherently that connection, that cultural connection that we have no right to take away, that governments, provincial territories, federal territories have no right to take away. But they have taken that away to Indigenous communities. And they have taken that away to Indigenous communities for generations. And again, that was attempted assimilation and extermination to get rid of Indigenous culture. And we can't stand for that. And we need to take the lead on that. Will we take that lead by ourselves as Manitoba? Maybe, and that's fine. I know every member on this side of the chamber is willing to take on that challenge to say, yes, this is the right thing to do. This is the culturally right thing to do. So that every culture here in Manitoba, not just Indigenous communities, have the right to carry forward their culture, to carry forward their names proudly, not to be ashamed, and not to try and be forced to put that into a box that somebody else has designed, to assimilate and exterminate your culture and your people. So I do call on this government to do more. I do call on this government to strengthen this piece of legislation, to have those communications with all levels of government, not just here in the province, but all levels across Canada. Because in the minister's responses to the Q&A, he fully acknowledges the fact that this does not affect status cards. This does not affect passports. So just in that alone, there's the admission that this isn't enough. So why don't you bring forward something that is enough? Bring forward a concrete plan to be able to say, I am now going to take that excuse away from the federal government. What we have here is working. What we have here will work. But the minister knows that it won't. The minister knows that this is not enough. The minister knows that this is only going to work to a certain point. And as this government consistently says, Indigenous issues are a federal responsibility, he inherently knows that this is not enough for Indigenous communities. And this, again, is their attempt to be able to say we're doing something for Indigenous communities, but at the same time, not enough. So people here in Manitoba, Indigenous communities and Indigenous people in Manitoba know this isn't enough. So their government is going to get out there and tout, we're doing this, great, we've passed Bill 3, so now you can do your traditional names, but you can't do this, and you can't do this. So really, in a sense, what does it do? Oh, it gets you a Manitoba health card, but by the way, when you take the Manitoba health card to the hospital, we're going to tell you to go to Ottawa. You want your health card to work on reserve? Go to Ottawa. So do more, and this bill can do more. But the minister absolutely knows that this is not enough. This still falls short. There's still a lot of advocacy that needs to be done, and he can do it. He's just choosing not to, choosing to do the bare minimum, and the Indigenous communities here in Manitoba and Canada deserve more, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Go ahead.
The honourable member for Flin Flon.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And I don't want to add too much more to what my friend from Kiwetinook has put on the record. I do just want to point out that there are some Indigenous languages within the province of Manitoba, some in communities that I have the honour of representing, that will not be encapsulated by this act. I understand that the technology at present may not allow the Dene languages to be captured, but one would hope that there's provisions within this act so that as those become technically available, that they will be included. The other thing I would hope, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that this minister, this government, will actively work to ensure that those technological changes are made as quickly as possible so that we can be inclusive of all nations within the province of Manitoba. The other thing I sincerely hope that this government is prepared to do, which I don't have a lot of faith that they can actually work together with other jurisdictions, the federal government, the other provinces, so that they could truly be a leader and make sure that the other jurisdictions incorporate what Manitoba has proposed and actively work to ensure that all documentation that a person may require is capable of having the correct characters. Names are important for people. Parents naming their children, it's an important right. It's an important rite of passage. For someone to think that when this bill passes that it's the be-all and end-all, we need to make sure that people understand that when they register in Manitoba to have a Manitoba health card, a Manitoba driver's license that has the unique characters and combinations of names that will be allowed, that identification will not be sufficient for passports. It won't be sufficient for getting, for example, if you move to a different province, your identification may not be allowable the way things stand today to actually get registered in a different province. So I sincerely hope that this government is not just trying to curry favor before an election, to say, look at us, look what we've done. I sincerely hope that this government is actually sincere about ensuring that the provisions of this bill, which are very similar to the provision of the bill that the member from Kiwetinook introduced so many months ago, I sincerely hope that they will ensure that the other jurisdictions come along. And I understand that, for example, BC, the new premier there has indicated that they certainly want to progress along this line as well. So I sincerely hope that this government is able to work with, to share what they've done, and to learn what other jurisdictions are proposing or are doing in their legislation to ensure that throughout the country, a person's name is their name. A person's name is on all the documents that they may require, and it's the same name that their parents choose to give them, that it doesn't have to be changed depending on which jurisdiction you live in, or for that matter, which language you're born into. So I really, like I say, because I have the honor of representing 3 communities with a language that isn't included in this piece of legislation, that communities at Tuduli Lake, Lac Brochet, and Brochet, their names matter as well, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So I really want to encourage this government to work with whatever technology providers they need to, preferably within the province of Manitoba, to encapsulate those symbols so that folks in those communities can also use their traditional names. So with those few words, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with the encouragement of all members on this side to encourage the members opposite to actually work towards making this legislation capable of working in every jurisdiction in Canada. And with that, I will conclude my remarks. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Tyndall Park.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and a couple of my colleagues here to my left here. I appreciate the opportunity to rise and just put a few words on the record. And I want to start off by also just thanking those who were part of the bill briefing. I always really I value the bill briefings that we are provided here as MLAs. I gain a lot of insight from them, and so I'd like to thank the departmental staff for taking that time. Just a few thoughts, Mr. Deputy Speaker. One, and I think it needs to be stated that if the government is going to bring forward Bill 3, they should follow the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action number 17. I know a couple of my colleagues have spoken about this already, but the recommendation calls on the government to enable survivors and their families to reclaim names changed by residential school systems, as well as waiving administrative costs for a period of time. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, the reason this is so important in part is because historic institutionalized racism changed many of the traditional names of Indigenous people. And I do think it's important to clarify, and I've spoken with, or my team has spoken with legal about this, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that subsection 6.2 in this legislation actually has the ability to waive these fees. So I'm hopeful that although the government did not mention it in their explanation and description of the bill, that there is still room within the legislation for the fees to be waived, if I'm understanding it correctly. And I hope that this is taken seriously and implemented if this legislation were to pass. And I think it is an important piece of legislation, and therefore it should include the ability to be retroactive. Those who have previously tried to change their names but perhaps faced barriers should be made aware that this legislation is being implemented so that they can reclaim their traditional names if they should wish to do so. And questions are asked, how will these individuals be notified, for example? And it speaks to an issue to make sure that those who would utilize this legislation have access to it. And I know a couple of the conversations that I have had about the legislation outside of these chambers, Mr. Deputy Speaker, are around the fact that what about those who perhaps have tried to change their names or will want to change their names for whatever reason it may be, Mr. Deputy Speaker? And what if they don't, for example, have a mailing address? Or what if they don't have a phone line? How can they go about and become aware of this legislation first and foremost, but also be able to work with Manitoba Vital Stats to go ahead and pursue these changes? Mr. Deputy Speaker, there's also fear that this could bring backlogs to vital statistics here in Manitoba, and it would be nice to just have some clarity and assurance that whether it's new people coming forward or retroactively people are able to change their names, that vital statistics are not backed up because of it. A couple of concerns that we do feel are part of this legislation, however, can be addressed is making sure that, for example, our keyboards and our software programs can make this work. And we think about how if a person, for example, wants to change their first and last name so they only have one name, how is this going to be adapted so that, for example, MPI for our licenses, is that allowed? That is a great question that has not been addressed, Mr. Deputy Speaker. What happens for passports? Right now, when you fill in a flight itinerary information, you need a first and a last name, or it won't allow you to proceed to the following page. So if you only have one name. And these are the points that I was getting to in my question, in the question portion of this legislation. We need to be able to address these concerns and make clear these concerns and ensure that anyone who is applying to have their names changed and could be adjusted or could be affected by these potential, I want to say potential setbacks, that we can still adjust or affect there, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We need to make sure it's made clear before the legislation is actually implemented. I'm hopeful that this government is going to work with the other provinces, work with the federal government. I do see it as being a positive step for reclaiming identity, and I think we need to be bringing it forward. But let's just make sure we do it right so that we're working smarter, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And I'm very curious to see what presenters are going to have to say about this legislation at committee, and we'll go from there. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Are there any other speakers? Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? Agreed? Agreed and so ordered. I declare the motion carried. As previously announced, we will now move to the Honourable Government House Leader on House Business.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. On House Business, I'd like to announce that the Standing Committee on Social and Economic Development will meet on Wednesday, November 30th, 2022 at 6 p.m. to consider the following. Bill number 3, the Vital Statistics Amendment Act name registration, and Bill number 213, the Animal Care Amendment Act.
It has been announced by the Honourable Government House Leader that the Standing Committee on Social and Economic Development will meet on Wednesday, November 30th, 2022 at 6 p.m. to consider the following: Bill 3, the Vital Statistics Amendment Act, name registration, and Bill 213, the Animal Care Amendment Act. We will now proceed, as previously announced, to second reading of Bill 5, the Demise of the Crown Act, various acts amended. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Arts, Culture, and Heritage, that Bill number 5, the Demise of the Crown Act, various acts amended, be now read a second time and be referred to a committee of this House.
It has been moved by the Honourable Minister of Justice, seconded by the Honourable Minister of Sport, Culture and Heritage, that Bill number 5, the Demise of the Crown Act, various acts amended, be now read a second time and be referred to a committee of this House. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Many Canadians, along with others in the Commonwealth and the realms, mourn the passing of Queen Elizabeth II when she died on September 8th of this year. And of course, following her passing, King Charles III has become the Sovereign of Canada. As a result, there are a number of necessary changes to Manitoba laws that need to happen. The bill that is now before the House in second reading will amend 15 acts in total. The amendments are primarily administrative in nature, and while I will not outline all of the changes, the following are examples of some of the amendments that will be made. A new section will be added to the Interpretation Act regarding succession. The provision will clarify that a change of a reigning sovereign does not affect anything done or begun under the previous reigning sovereign, and that all matters continue as if no succession had occurred. In addition, various definitions in the Interpretation Act will be amended to reflect the change of the sovereign which has now happened. As an example, the definition of government will be amended to mean His Majesty the King acting for the province of Manitoba. The title of the Queen's Printers Act will of course be replaced with the King's Printers Act, and references to Queen's Printer will be replaced with King's Printer. The title of the Queen's Counsel Act will be replaced with the King's Counsel Act, and references to QC will be replaced with KC. The Legislative Assembly Act will be amended by revising the oath or affirmation of allegiance to reference His Majesty King Charles III. In addition, one of the amendments to the Statutes and Regulations Act will result in a new provision that will provide the Chief Legislative Counsel with the authority to revise language and punctuation in other legislation and regulations to reflect the change of a sovereign. For example, the revision power may be used to change a reference from Queen to King or Her Majesty to His Majesty. This will allow changes related to the demise of the Crown to be made in an efficient and expeditious manner in the future. Of course, it may be because of the way succession is now lined up that this won't need to happen for 50 to 100 years, but it's important that it be put into this act to allow it to not have to go through this process again. So I look forward to the support of the House on this relatively administrative act. If there are questions during the question period which require more in-depth analysis or responses, I can provide them at the committee stage when this bill is referred to a committee of the House. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
A question period of up to 15 minutes will be held. Questions may be addressed to the minister by any member in the following sequence. First question by the official opposition critic or designate. Subsequent questions asked by critics or designates from other recognized opposition parties. Subsequent questions asked by each independent member. Remaining questions asked by any opposition members. And no question or answer shall exceed 45 seconds. The floor is open for questions. The honourable member for St. John's.
Miigwech, Deputy Speaker. Could the minister tell us who was consulted in writing this bill?
The honourable minister.
I thank the member for the question. Essentially, the bill came forward from legislative council and legislative drafters who indicated that and identified the various portions of the bill where Queen's Printer, for example, and the Queen's Counsel, where it was now misidentifying the sovereign.
The honourable member for River Heights.
Yeah, the minister indicated that the ability for the Chief Legislative Counsel to have a revision power to make the changes in the future, will that completely eliminate the need for a future act, or will there potentially be changes in the future which will have to be addressed as well?
The honourable minister.
I suppose that one shouldn't ever give an ironclad guarantee, but my understanding is that it should eliminate the need for this kind of an act in the future when the sovereign changes and there needs to be a re-identification.
The honourable member for St. John's.
Could the minister share with the House if and how this bill would affect all those who occupy public office?
The honourable minister.
Well, I don't know that there's a significant change if the member's asking about elected officials like MLAs. We didn't have to swear a new oath to the king, although I know that that was discussed whether or not that oath would have to be retaken. And I think some legislatures may have done that just voluntarily. But our understanding from Legislative Council is we didn't have to retake an oath. There are some positions like Queen's Counsel, those automatically became King Counsel designations.
The honourable member for River Heights.
Yeah, in the past, we've probably only considered the possibility of pronouns of her or him, but today in the world, we often have people whose pronouns are them or they. Would this power of revision still apply and be sufficient if that were the case, if the sovereign were non-binary, for example?
The Honourable Minister.
I'd want to confer with Legislative Council about the depth of that ability and the question that was asked. I suspect some of that would want to be conferred with those who would represent the Crown as well.
The honourable member for St. John's.
The Act names legislation for change, such as the Queen's Counsel Act, but also empowers Legislative Council to amend an act or regulation in the event of the demise of the Crown. Why then spell out individual pieces of legislation?
The honourable minister.
I think for certainty, there was a desire to identify the acts of which we now know because they're already acts of Manitoba. But of course, it's difficult to know what acts might come in the future that would identify the monarch. In the same way that the Queen's Counsel designation only came back, I believe, in 2016, it's difficult to know what new piece of legislation might come forward.
The honourable member for River Heights.
This bill will result in the power to revise for legislation, for bills, but there is a substantial amount of regulations which are passed by order in council, and I just want to check whether those would also be covered by the potential for revision and the need to revise.
The honourable minister.
It wasn't identified as a concern by Legislative Council. Of course, those could be changed by order in council. If they're regulations, they wouldn't have to come to the legislature because they're not acts. But I can get clarification for the member and provide it at committee.
The honourable member for St. John's.
With the empowering of Legislative Council to make changes directly to acts and regulations, does this mean that legislation will not be required in the future should there be a change to a monarch of a different gender? And I know that the member for River Heights also spoke about language and gender, but in this case, for this particular question, from king to queen.
The honourable minister.
That is my understanding.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, the floor is open for debate. Oh, sorry, I take that back. There are some more questions. The honourable member for St. John's.
A quick look at bills before the legislatures of other provinces doesn't show similar legislation. How have they arranged themselves to deal with the demise of the Crown? And will it differ from our own once this legislation passes?
The honourable minister.
I'd have to get a cross-country comparison, but I know, for example, there are some provinces where they no longer have, and haven't for years, referred to what we call the Court of Queen's Bench, now the Court of King's Bench. They don't refer to it in that language as often Superior Court or other language. So there are other provinces that just simply don't use the designation of the monarch in the same way that we do, so that might have not required them to have legislation. And others would have these kind of provisions where it would provide for an administrative change upon succession.
The honourable member for St. John's.
A number of changes need to be made or have been made, such as from Court of Queen's Bench to Court of King's Bench. Can the minister tell us what the cost of these changes will be?
The honourable minister.
Difficult to predict. I mean, some of this was obviously new to me too, because I only have lived under Queen Elizabeth. But I know that when the changes, or when the Queen passed away, there was questions about Court of King's Bench, the King's Council designations. Those happened automatically, almost automatically. The Court of Queen's Bench became the Court of King's Bench, and Queen's Councils became King's Councils. So I think that the costs will be borne over time. You know, obviously website changes don't cost anything, but there might be some signage and those sort of things that have to happen at different times. You see the different crowns that exist even above your head, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I'm not suggesting that's going to change, but at different places in the military and that sort of thing, they might move from a designation of
The
a
minister's
Queen's
time
crown
has
to a King's.
expired. The honourable member for St. John's.
The bill proposes a change to the Interpretation Act with regard to succession under Section 49, bracket 1. And I quote, "A change of reigning sovereign does not affect anything done or begun under the previous reigning sovereign, and all matters continue as if no succession has occurred," end quote. What's the reason for this change? And wouldn't this be true even without these additional provisions?
The honourable minister.
It may be included just, more for certainty than any other matter. Is often when they're, we're creating new legislation, drafters will want to have clearer language, and so there's no misinterpretation in the future. But I'll take that question away and return at committee and provide the answer in my statement there.
Are there any further questions? Seeing none, the floor is open for debate. The honourable member for St. John's.
Miigwech, Deputy Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to get up in the House and just put a little bit of words on the record. The demise of the Crown Act amends several statutes to deal with the demise of the Crown. The Chief Legislative Council is given revision power to make changes to other acts and regulations to reflect the change in sovereign. Deputy Speaker, as a result of Queen Elizabeth II's passing, certain changes are being made to titles and articles that had previously been used to refer to the Crown. These changes include the schedule of definitions being amended to reflect the succession of Queen Elizabeth II by King Charles III. Titles like Her Majesty the Queen are being changed on all official documents to His Majesty the King in accordance to the change of the reigning sovereign. This succession does not affect the content of documents or the proceedings and occasions where the name of the sovereign is mentioned. It affects only the title used to refer to the current occupant of the Crown. Titles of documents like the Queen's Council Act and the Queen's Printer Act will be replaced with the King's Council Act and the King's Printer Act. Wherever the Queen's Council and the Queen's printer were previously mentioned in the document, it will be changed to King's Counsel and King's Printer as a result of this bill. Short forms of the sovereign's title will also be changed to reflect the King's succession of the late Queen. Documents that formerly included abbreviations like QC will now be substituted with KC. This change reflects the passing of Queen Victoria and statutes referring to Her Majesty and the Queen. It's been many decades since there has been a change from a queen to a king, or vice versa. The legislation proposes changes to several statutes, but it also empowers Legislative Council to make changes to legislation directly with regards to references to the sovereign as either he/she, his/her, or king/queen. We presume this means that legislation would not be required in the distant future when the crown passes between king to queen. It appears other jurisdictions are not introducing similar legislation. I'm hopeful the minister will have made clear why that is. I'm also hopeful that this legislation empowers Legislative Council so that legislation is not required in the future on the passing of the crown. It is a little surprising that processes to identify the king/queen in statute upon the demise of the crown have not been contemplated before, but I would submit to the House, I suspect that that's a consequence of Queen Elizabeth II having reigned over the Commonwealth for like 70 years. So I would submit that that's probably why. And of course, Deputy Speaker, it is true that Queen Elizabeth II reigned for a long time, and that Manitoba is a young province in a young country. Although, of course, we know, Deputy Speaker, that Indigenous peoples have been on our territories in what is now called Manitoba and is what is called Canada for time immemorial. Nonetheless, since our province was legally established as Manitoba, pardon me, I don't think this makes sense, I apologize. Let me begin again. Queen Victoria died in 1901. She was then succeeded by kings, Edward VII, George V, Edward VIII, and George VI. The throne passed again between kings and queen with the passing of King George V in 1952. and then, of course, with the ascension of Queen Elizabeth II in 1952. I suppose, Deputy Speaker, in my 22 minutes left, it is probably important to put some words on the record in respect of Queen Elizabeth II. So, Queen Elizabeth II was born on April 21st, 1926, in London, England, to Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon and Prince Albert, Duke of York. Queen Elizabeth was a teenager during World War II. Because of that, she spent much of it living away from London, protected from World War II. And with her parents to avoid the Blitz. However, the war also allowed her to break somewhat from the traditional limits of her activities. On May 8th, 1945, Victory in Europe Day, not even the fact that she was the heir apparent to the British throne could stop her from celebrating the end of the world in the streets alongside the rest of London while disguised in her military uniform. In 1947, the royal family announced Queen Elizabeth's engagement to her cousin Philip Mountbatten, formerly Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark. They married on November 20th of 1947. By 1951, Queen Elizabeth was performing royal duties for her father, King George VI, as his health was declining. While she was on a royal tour of Kenya in 1952, King George VI died, and she became Queen Elizabeth II. She was the first monarch in over 200 years to succeed to the throne while outside Britain. Queen Elizabeth II was officially coronated on June 2nd, 1953, at Westminster Abbey. Queen Elizabeth's coronation service was the first of its kind to ever be televised, and many people bought their first TVs in order to be able to watch the ceremony. And I would submit to the House that as Canada is part of the Commonwealth, colonized by the British, that footage of Queen Elizabeth II's coronation, I would submit everybody grew up at least at one point in our lives seeing that somewhere, seeing that coronation. I know that I remember seeing that because I used to watch the news even as a little girl, and I remember seeing that quite often. Of course, as a little girl, not really understanding why we have a queen, but nonetheless, I remember that footage, like I'm sure many, many, many other folks in this chamber and Canadians remember. First color photos that the member from Transcona is sharing with the House, which is accurate. Queen Elizabeth had 4 children with her husband, Charles Philip Arthur George,
born in 1948. Anne Elizabeth Alice Louise, born in 1950, Deputy Speaker. Andrew Albert Christian Edward, born in 1960. And Edward Anthony Richard Lewis, born in 1964. Of course, Deputy Speaker, we know some of her children have made more news than others. We know, for instance, that Andrew was part of some discussion in the last many years, an investigation in respect of the sexual exploitation of a minor. And interestingly enough, that is often kind of left out of the narrative when we talk about the royal family. But I do think that in 2022 in this House, it is important that we bring that into the discussion in respect of his connection with Jeffrey Epstein, who, of course, the House will know and Manitobans will know is one of the U.S.'s most prolific child sex traffickers, rapists, exploiters, all of that. And so Prince Andrew, although I'm not sure if he's still a prince, I don't know. I understood that he's no longer doing royal duties, but Prince Andrew, we'll just say Prince Andrew, had a significant relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. And I'm sure, I would hope that everybody in the chamber has seen the picture of Prince Andrew with a young girl, a 16-year-old girl, who, many years later, had to be accountable for that. Of course, at the time of Queen Elizabeth II's passing, she also had 8 grandchildren and 12 great-grandchildren. And of course, we know that her grandson, William, the son to Prince Charles and the late Diana, who I have to say I really liked Princess Diana. I thought she was good for them. I think she did good work. Of course, he is her grandson and is in succession to be the next king at the passing of his father, the current King Charles. At any rate, Deputy Speaker, the legislation before us considers the demise of the Crown and the legal proceedings that must occur upon her death. We also consider how the monarch lived. Queen Elizabeth II celebrated many milestones during her long, long reign. The first of these was in 1977, when she celebrated her Silver Jubilee, marking the first 25 years of her time on the throne. In 2002, Queen Elizabeth's
Golden Jubilee, celebrating her 50th year reign, was marked by events and celebrations in London and all across the Commonwealth countries. Her Diamond Jubilee, representing her 60 years on the throne, was celebrated in 2012. And her Platinum Jubilee, which was a first ever for a British monarch, was celebrated this year. And I will share with the House, I know that most folks will know that the first ceremony of the Jubilee Awards, Queen Jubilee Awards, were given out yesterday to deserving Manitobans. I just want to say, Deputy Speaker, that yesterday was really nice. It was a really nice ceremony, and you know, we, as everybody in this House knows, each of us was given 10 of these medals to give out to constituents.
Very nice.
And I know that when Brad Robertson had initially come to tell us about this, I was actually really excited about this. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to highlight the good work of Manitobans who often don't get that ability or have that opportunity to get acknowledged and honored and recognized and highlighted for their work. Last night was really nice. In fact, our clerk, Deputy Clerk, got to sing and brought everybody in and sang. Our clerk was given a medal as well, and very, very deserving. But it was really nice. It was a really nice evening. I know that our NDP caucus, we had a little bit of a reception afterwards, and for all of our recipients and their families that were able to attend, and it was just really nice. And you know, Mr. Robertson had shared with everybody in attendance that only 1,000 of these medals are going to be given out. And it's not a lot, actually. And so there's only 1,000 Manitobans that are going to have these pins. And so I do think that that's very special. And I was pleased to be able to acknowledge some pretty phenomenal Manitobans within St. John's and within my sacred circle, including some folks that are on the front lines of animal rescue, folks that are involved in community centers that have very little resources to do extraordinary work. I was actually able to give a medal to the owner of Baraka, which I think is one of the best restaurants in Winnipeg, which, by the way, we're going to have Baraka tomorrow for lunch. Yeah.
Okay, I'll show up then.
And then, of course, Indigenous women, family members, MMIWG2S family members, I was able to acknowledge the work that they do. And then, of course, the good work of Cora Morgan, who is the First Nations family advocate, who does really phenomenal work at bringing home children who are in CFS care. And as I'm sure the House knows, you know, the consequence of colonization is that you know, colonization is not over, and I often will talk about that. It's a historical continuum, And so these lands were colonized by the British, and laws and policies and regulations enacted that contributed to the deaths of children, of Indigenous children. And we still see those consequences in the number of children that are apprehended by Indigenous families, predominantly Indigenous women's, to no fault of their own, in the way that parenting and Indigenous mothers are constructed, and the generational poverty that Indigenous people are forced to live in constantly. I think that's important to put on the record in respect of what we're discussing today. But certainly, like I said, I was very pleased to be able to give a medal to Cora Morgan. In many respects, it's fitting to be able to give a medal to an Indigenous woman who is fighting every single day to bring home children as a result of and the consequence of colonization. At any rate, back to Queen Elizabeth II. On September 9th, 2015, Deputy Speaker, Queen Elizabeth became the longest reigning British monarch, taking the title from Queen Victoria, who reigned for almost 64 years. I mean, the one thing you have to say is that the women in that family know how to reign, know how to be a queen, know how to be a monarch, and are dedicated to their service. And so certainly herself and I guess her grandmother are great at reigning. And so, again, another interesting note is that in 2021, her husband, Queen Elizabeth II's husband, of over 70 years, again, that I have to say is pretty extraordinary to be married to one man for 70 years.
Considering they died.
Prince Philip died in 2021. Yeah.
Otherwise, they'd still be going.
And otherwise, well, yeah. She, Queen Elizabeth II, had described Prince Philip as her strength and stay. And then, of course, photos of his socially distanced funeral highlighted the lonely grief that was experienced by many, many people in the COVID-19 pandemic. I will wrap up my my comments by saying this. Of course, we will, on this side of the House, be supporting Bill 5, the demise of the Crown Act, because obviously there's some changes that need to be made, some administrative changes that need to be made with the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. And I don't think that we want to hold up this bill. No. There's no reason for us to hold up a bill that is, in many respects, just administrative. That's how we're gonna get this done. And I think that we can agree that these are important changes. And again, moving forward, and again, we don't know what's going to happen in the monarchy, how long King Charles II will be on the throne. We don't know that. And so I would say that I think that it is good that in the legislation Chief Legislative Counsel has the ability to make those changes again, so that perhaps we don't have to hear a similar speech from myself again in the House. I know that the member opposite, the minister sponsoring the bill, is disappointed in that. But, you know, you just never know, and I do think that there's some foresight in allowing the Chief Legislative Counsel to be able to make those changes. And then my final words is it is interesting that we do have to get used to saying, you know, King's Court or King's Counsel. It's not rolling off the tongue just yet. And I think that that's a consequence, again, of how long Queen Elizabeth II reigned, and that for all of us, that was all that we knew. That was all that we knew in respect of a queen for the Commonwealth. But I suspect that that will soon just be part of our daily narrative and discourse as well. And so with those few short, inspiring, concise, riveting words, I say miigwech.
All right.
Order, please. Are there any other speakers? The honourable member for Notre Dame.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The purpose of this bill is to amend several statutes to deal with the demise of the Crown, and another purpose is for the Chief Legislative Counsel to be given a revision power to make changes to other acts and regulations to reflect the change of sovereign. And as we consider this legislation with regard to the demise of the Crown, we consider the remarkable stability of the long-serving sovereign. Most Canadians know no one else in that role, and for many, the Crown meant Queen Elizabeth II. But her reign did reflect a period of incredible global change and upheaval. She witnessed incredible technological transformation. For example, in 1976, she was one of the first people to ever send an email, an unthinkable communication method during her childhood years. Throughout times of turmoil in her family, her country, and the Commonwealth, Queen Elizabeth was looked to by many as a figure of stability and consistency, no matter what was going on in the world. She oversaw the formal appointment of over a dozen British prime ministers, the last of which just occurred days before her death, so she was really working until her death. She welcomed many visiting leaders from other countries, including close to 10 Canadian prime ministers. And as we contemplate the legislative changes required on the demise of the Crown, it is important to consider the Crown's special role in Canada. Queen Elizabeth II made 22 official visits to Canada throughout her reign, and this is more than to any other country she visited. She referred to Canada as her home. And because of Queen Elizabeth's special interest in Canada, she was here during many pivotal moments in Canadian history. Some examples include the fact that Queen Elizabeth was the first monarch to open Canadian Parliament. She was also there to deliver the speech from the throne in Canada, and she did this in 1957. Queen Elizabeth II was present when the St. Lawrence Seaway was opened in 1959. And in 1964, she traveled to Charlottetown to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the meeting of the Fathers of Confederation. In 1967, she was in Ottawa for Canada's centennial celebrations, and she was part of the patriation ceremony of Canada's Constitution Act and the new Charter of Rights and Freedoms in 1982. These were certainly pivotal moments in Canadian history, and she was there for all of that. She was also involved in other important Canadian events, such as attending Expo 67 in Montreal, the proclamation of Canada's national flag in 1965. She helped establish the Order of Canada in 1967, and she rededicated the Canadian National Vimy Memorial in 2007. Queen Elizabeth held several roles in Canada as well. She was the representation of the Crown as head of state and for its treaties, and she was Commander-in-Chief of the Canadian Armed Forces, as well as Captain General, Colonel-in-Chief, and Air Commodore-in-Chief of several different branches of the military. She was always committed to supporting the military and highlighting their importance, and she frequently visited military bases and oversaw military ceremonies, and she also met with many veterans. Queen Elizabeth II was appointed Honorary Commissioner of the RCMP in 1953, and in 2012 she was appointed Commissioner-in-Chief of the RCMP in celebration of her Diamond Jubilee. In response to this honor, she asked the RCMP to replace the Queen's lifeguard for a day. This was notable and a very prestigious task because it was the first time that she was guarded by a force other than the British military. As we consider this legislation on the demise of the Crown, we consider how Manitobans saw Queen Elizabeth II. Of her more than the 22 trips to Canada, she visited Manitoba 6 times. The first was on her first official visit to Canada in 1951, and the last was in July of 2010. Her first visit to Manitoba as the Queen was in 1959 with Prince Philip. And in 1970, Queen Elizabeth, along with Prince Philip, Prince Charles, and Princess Anne, their children, visited our province for the 100th anniversary celebration of Manitoba joining Confederation. You know, what an honor for her to be there with us at that time. The festivities included a dinner at Manitoba's Government House, attending the Manitoba Centennial Derby at Assiniboia Downs, and meeting with Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, Sr. It wasn't all formality, though, as they took the time to meet with ordinary Manitobans, including a visit to the farm of Roy and Nora Bailey near Brandon. And there they rode horses, had a garden party, talked about farming. All the while, the Queen was apparently taking pictures of everything she saw. The Bailey family remembered these royals as being easy to talk to and taking a genuine interest in their farm and daily lives. During the 1970 visit, Queen Elizabeth also toured a Hutterite colony in Manitoba, and the story goes that a Hutterite woman sent the Queen 2 pairs of red mittens that she had knitted, and in response she got a letter saying that the Queen wanted to visit a Hutterite colony next time she was in Manitoba. Someone after my own heart, somebody that always writes thank you notes. While no one knows whether or not it was the red mittens that convinced her, she followed through and visited Milltown during her centennial visit, which, according to a government news release at the time, was the province's oldest Hutterite colony. And so with those words, I'd like to wrap up my comments and provide support for the passing of this important legislation. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Are there any other speakers? The question before the House is second reading of Bill number 5, the Demise of the Crown Act. Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion? Agreed and so ordered. I declare the motion carried. On House business, the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to announce, in addition to the bills previously referred, that Bill number 5, the Demise of the Crown Act, various acts amended, will also be considered at the November 30th, 2022 meeting of the Standing Committee on Social and Economic Development. Thank you.
It has been announced by the Honourable Government House Leader that in addition to bills previously referred, that Bill 5, the Demise of the Crown Act, various acts amended, will also be considered at the November 30th, 2022 meeting of the Standing Committee on Social and Economic Development. The hour being 5 p.m., this House is adjourned and stands adjourned until tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. Have a good evening, everybody.